It went without saying that the neutral zone instructors were limited.
Including the general manager, a neutral zone needed at least 10 personnel, and the number could not exceed 10% of the total number of people.
Meaning, the number of instructors allowed to enter the 2018 March neutral zone would be 53 or less. Of course, Seoul Ji-hoo didn't plan to fill up all 53 seats. Although the general manager would gain survival points even if they sat around and did nothing, the instructors' gains would be strictly merit-based. It would depend on how well they could coax the trainees into spending their survival points. For example, the instructor in charge of operating the cafeteria would gain little but consistent survival points, while the instructor in charge of the VIP store would be able to go for a single big fortune. In other words, while an instructor's profits would fundamentally depend on their ability, having fewer instructors would allow them to gain a bigger piece of the pie. This was the reason Seoul Ji-hoo decided to bring the minimum number of people he could. I'll definitely be bringing all of Valhalla's members though. A total of 15 people from Valhalla would be entering the neutral zone. Although only 13 of them could actually perform as instructors, the neutral zone had strict rules, which did not set Flown and Little Chick as exceptions. Whether one was a human being, a ghost, or an animal, they would be counted as one head if they entered. As Earthlings tried to game the system after the heavy restrictions came in effect, the Seven Kingdoms had sealed any means for them to cheat. As Seoul Ji-hoo recognized Flown and Little Chick as members of Valhalla, he could not just leave them behind and decided to bear the cost. Another restriction was that only up to 60% of the instructors could be from the managing organization. As such, Seoul Ji-hoo cut off the number of instructors at 25 exactly. Only after discussing with the participating instructors and distributing the roles was Seoul Ji-hoo able to get a breather. Finally, the preparation had ended. Done. Seoul Ji-hoo put down his pen and sprung up with his arms in the end, feeling refreshed. Now, there was only one thing left to do: lazing around while watching his comrades run around the neutral zone to gain survival points. You better not ask me for any help, or else you won't hear the end of it. But I'll help Yuhui Nuna and Kim Hana a bit. Seoul Ji-hoo vowed small vengeance according to the golden rule before plopping down on his bed completely relaxed. Although he planned to take a nap, he fell into a deep sleep. By the time he woke up, the day had gone by, and it was the next morning. And the person he had been waiting for was back. Kim Hana had returned to paradise late last night. Seoul Ji-hoo heard this news from Seo Yuhui, who came into his room to tell him to eat breakfast. Seoul Ji-hoo ran to the 10th floor trying to suppress his excitement and saw Kim Hana sitting at a table, drinking coffee. "You're here?" Looking back at Seoul Ji-hoo, Kim Hana grinned. As this was not an official place, she did not use polite speech, but that was not a problem. Seoul Ji-hoo glued his butt on the chair across from her. "Don't be in such a rush. I was going to report to you yesterday when I came back, but you were sleeping like a baby. You should have woken me up." "No, you were sleeping so soundly. I would have felt horrible if I did." Kim Hana giggled as she took a sip of coffee. "You even finished my share of the paperwork." "Thanks." "Really? It's nothing. It needed to be done anyway." "Good job too." "Oh my. Thank you, Representative." Kim Hana spoke in an unusually cutesy tone. She seemed to be in a terrific mood, perhaps because the preparations were done when she came back. "It was a success," Kim Hana answered without dragging it out any longer. "Getting in touch was easy, but not so much afterward. I thought she would be easy to coax since she entered paradise once already, but it was trickier than I expected." "How so?" She looked interested, but she didn't try to show it. She asked all sorts of questions before asking me to give her some time to think. And she did that, twice. Right. She probably found it difficult to believe that she could not remember anything about a world she had gone to before. To be honest, I thought she would refuse and was racking my brain for a plan. But then she suddenly called me up, cheekily reaching out her hand like she'd buy my story just this once.
Kim Hannah smirked as she put her coffee mug down.
Anyway, I stamped her right then and there. Now she won't be able to refuse even if she wanted to. If you stamped her, that must mean she accepted my terms, right? Of course. I explained everything to her on our second meeting, and she gave her answer on the third. Sol Ji-hoo clenched his fists.
But that kid was really cheeky.
She said, if you're telling the truth, I should be able to confirm it when I get to that unspeakable world. Kim Hannah shook her head.
Sol Ji-hoo asked with his eyes sparkling.
So?
Quote. How was she?
Yuri, I mean.
Did she look okay?
I don't know.
I can't open up her status window, so I have no way of knowing.
But.
Kim Hannah paused for a moment before continuing.
She seemed timid, but I could also tell that she was a bit of an oddball. From the way she talked, she wasn't stupid at all. She didn't feel like an ordinary college student. Oh ho.
Also, she was really pretty. Oh yeah? Sol Ji-hoo rejoiced.
Yep. Even when she was just sitting still, the aura she gave off was no joke. She was one of those atmospheric beauties.
Ooh. Kim Hannah glanced at Sol Ji-hoo coldly.
Oi.
Why are you so happy? Sol Ji-hoo blinked rapidly.
It's because you said she wasn't ordinary. I'm sure it is. Kim Hannah sighed. Ehu, why are there only a few men in our organization? It's women everywhere.
Everywhere, I tell you.
Sol Ji-hoo stealthily looked away, hearing Kim Hannah's obvious jab. However, he suddenly remembered something good and spoke.
Oh yeah, do you remember when you and I first met?
Cough. Kim Hannah lightly coughed as if she choked on her coffee. Cough, cough. Damn it, I was wondering why you were just letting it go.
Hee, you didn't remember until I brought it up, right?
Damn it,
why did I?
Kim Hannah smacked her lips while glancing sideways.
Sol Ji-hoo smiled faintly.
I'm curious about something. Sorry. Kim Hannah apologized right away. I didn't know. No, it's not that I didn't know, but I didn't have time. I didn't think I'd be using the gold stamp on you. So mean.
Mean?
What part of you back then was I supposed to trust? Kim Hannah grumbled softly as she studied Sol Ji-hoo's face.
However, he only stared at her without a word. She must have had a guilty conscience as she spoke when Sol Ji-hoo didn't say anything. Come on, think about me a little. I don't have any battle power.
Killing me is like snapping a twig. Still, his gaze did not drop. Arg, damn it. Unable to bear his indescribable gaze, Kim Hannah eventually raised the white flag. Okay, I'll apologize. Sorry. Let bygones be bygones, please?
If you're sorry, do me a favor. Then I'll forget about it completely. A favor?
It's nothing difficult. You just have to do as I say.
Oh. Hey, I'll just give you my jacket. How about you use it for a day and return it to me? You said you liked my smell, right?
I've been wearing it for 2 days. I'll take it for now. It's nowhere enough though.
Sol Ji-hoo did not refuse, making Kim Hannah dumbstruck.
Are you for real? I actually can't believe it.
Ignoring Kim Hannah's pleas, Sol Ji-hoo spoke with a smile.
Soon.
Have some shame.
Do you really want to do that?
Kim Hannah criticized Sol Ji-hoo with a pitying look.
Why? It's fun. Put fun aside for this. I have to de-stress somehow, right? Anyway, it shouldn't be difficult, so you choose. Sol Ji-hoo gave an ultimatum before getting up from his seat.
Oh. I'll give this back to you in the neutral zone.
Of course, he didn't forget to take the jacket hanging on Kim Hannah's seat.
Staring at him with a dumbfounded look, Kim Hannah shouted, "At least don't take the jacket."
Asterisk. Time flew, and the opening of the neutral zone entered the countdown stage. Although preparations were fully made and there was nothing more to be done, Valhalla was bustling from early morning. The tutorial would start at 8 p.m. Earth time. All participating instructors had to enter before then. Although leaving the organization building empty weighed on Sol Jihu's mind, there was no need to worry about any possible burglary as Floan admonished the mob of housebound spirits to keep the place safe. Valhalla's members hopped on the carriage at the right time and left for the neutral zone. However, Sol Jihu did not leave with them and remained in Eva. He had told his comrades that he had to take care of something as general manager and that he would arrive before it's too late, so they should enter first. Then, the place he visited was Luxuria's temple. Now that Un-Yuri was stamped, she had to come to paradise regardless of her will. But before then, there was something he needed to do. I want to use a wish. Using a wish to resurrect Un-Yuri. Only then would she gain the qualification to enter paradise again. Sol Jihu was somewhat looking forward to this process. After all, this was the first time he was using a divine wish. However, nothing of note happened. Never mind a grand ceremony. All he got were words that the wish was heard and that the resurrection was complete. After Luxuria's confirmation, Sol Jihu returned to Valhalla with a grin. It was boring to stay in such a big building alone, but he spent his time productively, vigorously training for the first time in a while. Then, when it was time, he finally started walking toward the destination. Where he headed to was the portal within the temple. He did not get on a carriage and go to the neutral zone bordering Scheherazade. Instead, he had gone back to Earth. Coming back after a long time, Sol Jihu immediately checked the current time. 2018 March 22, 7:31 p.m. Good. He had returned on time thanks to calculating the time several times. As Kim Hanna said, the tutorial was a stage that was randomly created on Earth, and the summoning happened on Earth as well. In other words, he would not be able to enter the tutorial if he stayed in paradise. Though, that wouldn't be impossible in the first place except for unique situations. After wandering around his room for a while, Sol Jihu suddenly checked his phone. There was a big backlog of text messages and calls that he failed to pick up. Many were from his mother and older brother, and Yun Seora had interestingly texted him as well. I need to give them a call. Although this thought crossed his mind, Sol Jihu gently put his phone down. He could be on the phone for a while if he started talking to them, but he had less than 10 minutes remaining. There was a chance the call would end in the middle. Blaming himself for being too busy with paradise, Sol Jihu quietly sat down and waited. Finally, the clock turned to 8 p.m., and a change occurred. Without any signs, a silvery light formed in the air before quickly descending and swallowing Sol Jihu whole. So this was what happened. As he had been so flustered the first time, he had not seen it clearly. Sol Jihu stared in amazement as the light rapidly dyed his body. In the next moment, his vision turned white, and irresistible drowsiness flooded in. Asterisk. When he opened his eyes, an unfamiliar scenery unfolded before him. What the? After getting up, Sol Jihu first checked his surroundings. I thought it would be my apartment room. But rather than his room, he found himself in a living room he had never seen before. It looked like the house of an average middle-class family. It was then. Wing, wing. A vibrating sound buzzed, followed by a recorded robotic voice. Now, rise and shine. Wake up and check your messages. Hurry up. Although the echo in the room made it slightly unclear, he could still tell that it was Phi Sora's voice. This woman. Neutral zone aside, she had insisted on taking charge of the tutorial. Sol Jihu really couldn't feel a hint of manners in her tone. Laughing blandly, when he tried to enter the room where the voice came from. Identification complete. An alert struck his ears. Confirming the admission of Sol Jihu, the helper of Goldmark invited, Un-Yuri. Seeing the message, Sol Jihu grinned. It was generally believed that an Earthling could only experience the tutorial once.
However, the reason he could enter the tutorial as a fully fledged Earthling lied on the gold invitation.
The invitation clearly said on the bottom,
"This invitation letter allows the honored guest to bring along another person as a helper."
In other words, Sol Ji-hoo had obtained the qualification to enter the tutorial again by becoming Un Yuri's helper. According to Luxuria, the gold stamp was made for someone who must be brought in. The tutorial should be a piece of cake. Although the stage was created on Earth, the tutorial was an independent space just like the neutral zone.
As he could use all his abilities from Paradise, it would be more difficult to fail the stage.
Sol Ji-hoo pledged to explore every corner of the tutorial this time.
That was, before a new alert rang out.
A gold mark invited entering with their helper has initiated. Tutorial modification.
Goldmark's bonus privilege, hidden stage, has been opened.
Ha!
Sol Ji-hoo blinked rapidly.
The tutorial changed when a helper entered with a gold mark invited?
A new hidden stage would open?
He had never heard anything about it. What's going on? As he was standing dazedly from the unexpected turn of events. Click. He heard the sound of a door opening. It was from the room where the voice came from before. Sol Ji-hoo had no choice but to doubt his eyes when he saw a woman staggering out of the room with her hand against the wall. She was struggling to walk not because she was ill or morbidly obese. It was because she simply had too many layers of clothes on.
No, this volume couldn't be because of having just too many clothes on. Sol Ji-hoo stared at the outer padding that was about to burst, and lo and behold.
Ah! The woman fumbled.
She immediately spread out her arms in an attempt to balance herself, and Sol Ji-hoo quickly rushed to support her.
Are you okay?
Why yes.
As the woman spoke while nodding her head. I'm fine. TK. The catcher's mask she was wearing fell to the ground. Quote. The woman shut her mouth, not finishing her previous thought. Of course, Sol Ji-hoo was at a loss for words as well. What the heck is this catcher's mask for?
Why is she wearing it?
She even had a hat on.
At this moment, his cell phone rang once more along with Phi Sora's voice urging them to hurry.
Sol Ji-hoo pressed his forehead. He already had a lot on his mind. Many questions were yet to be answered, but he decided to ask what he was most curious about first.
Why? Are you wearing all that?
To prepare for the tutorial. Her voice was soft but clear.
Rather than timid, she sounded empty and dry. To prepare for the tutorial? Scanning her outfit again, Sol Ji-hoo's expression contorted.
It was a strange sight no matter how many times he saw it. At least her bottoms were airier than the layers upon layers of clothes that she had on above her waist. Did you dress like that on purpose?
To increase your defense? The woman didn't answer, seemingly sensing a negative connotation from his tone.
She only looked up at him blankly.
Sol Ji-hoo corrected himself.
Well, you have great preparedness. Thank you. She bowed politely, then spoke. I put some thought in wearing this, but I think it would be better to take them off. Right?
You think so? Thankfully, she didn't seem to be a complete idiot. As Sol Ji-hoo was inwardly breathing a sigh of relief, the woman continued talking.
I thought I was more than prepared with this until a moment ago. I realized how stupid I was when I opened my eyes. Sol Ji-hoo did not miss the underlying meaning of her words. Her memories must have come back. In that case, this person really must be. The sound of struggling was heard. She was trying to take off her clothes, but could not even bring her arms together.
After trying it a few times, she gave up and stared at Sol Ji-hoo. Sol Ji-hoo sighed. Let me help. Starting from the outermost padding, he got through 6 layers of tops and bottoms before taking out knee and shin protectors and finally the leather gaiters.
Only then did her real clothes, a monotone tracksuit that was definitely penetrated by the wind, reveal itself. Coincidentally, Sol Ji-hoo was also wearing a matching set of sweatshirt and sweatpants that Kim Hana bought him, making the two look similar. Phew. Seemingly exhausted, the woman plunked down on the ground and spat out a sigh. It must have been scorching hot under all those layers as tiny beads of sweat were staining her light gray tracksuit. Sol Ji-hoo carefully studied her as she took off her hat and fanned her face with a look that said, "Ah, I finally feel alive." Neat eyes that seemed to be drawn with a paintbrush and similarly graceful facial features that were like timidly bloomed peach blossoms. The atmosphere she gave off wasn't a joke either. She was simply sitting still, yet she gave off a cynical and sensitive air. Although she was in the same room as Sol Ji-hoo, it felt like she was in a world of her own. Moreover, the beauty mark under one of her transient pupils gave off a heartrending allure. It was at this point that Sol Ji-hoo realized Kim Hana's previous description of her had been spot on. She was undeniably a beauty, but she also seemed to be a bit of an oddball. That said, he didn't yet understand what part of her was cheeky. Did she feel his gaze? The woman put her cap on again before getting up. "Thank you for helping me out." She cupped her hands together and bowed. Sol Ji-hoo said what he should have said a long time ago. "Nice to meet you. I'm Sol Ji-hoo." You're the one who invited me, right?" "Yes, and you must be Un Yuri." Un Yuri spoke in a soft voice. Then, again. Her expression became dazed. She looked into the empty air, and her already blank expression disappeared completely. "Miss Un Yuri?" Her ears must still be open as she snapped out instantly. "Are you all right?" "Yes." A calm reply came out. "I was just organizing my thoughts a bit." Un Yuri muttered as she wiped her forehead drenched with sweat. Sol Ji-hoo didn't blame her for being confused. After all, she must have just gotten back the memories she lost. "What does resurrecting feel like?" Sol Ji-hoo grew curious about Un Yuri's thoughts. "Do you need my help with anything? Or do you have any questions?" "No, it's fine. I'm pretty much set, thanks to Miss Kim Hana explaining everything clearly. But…" Un Yuri shook her head in the middle of talking. "There's something I want to confirm." Sol Ji-hoo nodded, signaling at her to go ahead. "Did I really come back?" "To paradise, I mean." It was a somewhat unexpected question. However, her low voice was filled with previously unexisting desperation. For some reason, this seemed to be an extremely important question to Un Yuri. "Of course. It'll sink in soon." Un Yuri's complexion brightened slightly. She looked strangely relieved as if knowing this was enough for now. It was then. Wing. Wing. Sol Ji-hoo's cell phone vibrated again. "Can you hurry up? What's up with these messages? Are you listening to me, dear? Arg, hurry up." Phi Sora's yelling flowed out. The sudden change must have caught her off guard even as the tutorial's manager as her tone couldn't get more urgent. Sol Ji-hoo finally took his eyes off of Un Yuri and turned to the room she came from. "There are some things we need to talk about, but should we first head to the gathering point?" "Looks like we should." Un Yuri agreed immediately. Perhaps because she had gone through this before, she was quick to understand. "Great, hold on." Sol Ji-hoo moved right away. Un Yuri seemed a little surprised, but Sol Ji-hoo didn't pay it any mind and walked into the room to retrieve a cell phone. "Here it is." Looking back, he saw a fidgeting Un Yuri. That's my room." "Oh, sorry. I'm in a bit of a hurry." "And no, it's not that." Un Yuri bit her lower lip and avoided his gaze. It didn't take long for Sol Ji-hoo to find out why. This room. To put it bluntly, it was a mess. There were at least 6 empty bags of chips and several ice cream sticks scattered everywhere. She must enjoy eating snacks as the room was full of traces of food. However, what caught Sol Ji-hoo's attention the most was a notebook sitting on her desk. What to do before and after entering. Eun Yuri must have made her own plans after listening to Kim Hana's explanation. Sol Ji-hoo could clearly picture her jotting down ideas while snacking on ice cream and chips.
Was she that excited? He felt this at the time of questioning her, but Eun Yuri really seemed to want to enter paradise even though she shouldn't have had any memories of it.
The more Sol Ji-hoo thought about this, the more curious he got.
However, he decided to ask about it later and left the room to hand her the cell phone.
Eun Yuri quickly received it. Her gaze then fell on the empty air. Identity confirmed. You have been registered as a user. Sender, the guide. She immediately checked her phone. 1. Gather at the island lot by the designated time. 2. Remaining time 0 hours 3 minutes and 17 seconds.
Island lot? Not the school auditorium? The start of the tutorial was clearly different from what Sol Ji-hoo remembered.
Eun Yuri, who was staring at her phone, also looked back at Sol Ji-hoo. She seemed to be asking for an explanation as the tutorial wasn't what she remembered. Did you hear the first message?
Yes, the bonus privilege of the gold mark.
I'm not sure what's going on either. This is also a first for me or anyone else in paradise for that matter. Eun Yuri's eyes widened slightly.
We don't have much time. The guide should know something about it. Let's go.
Eun Yuri nodded silently, then opened the door. It was dark outside. Dark clouds blanketed the sky, not revealing a single star. Sol Ji-hoo confirmed another change as soon as he stepped out. His fear had come to life as he wasn't in a city, but a jungle.
A dense forest filled up his vision.
The place he and Eun Yuri came out of wasn't Eun Yuri's apartment room, but a jungle cabin.
Let me get this straight. The gold mark wasn't the direct cause of the tutorial's change.
It was because a helper had entered with the gold mark invited. The problem was that no one knew this until now.
Sung Shi-hyun must have also entered the tutorial alone.
Otherwise, someone should have known about it, and there was no way Kim Hana wouldn't have heard about such a rare occurrence. In other words, Eun Yuri must be the first person in the history of paradise to have entered paradise with a helper, thereby triggering a type of hidden piece. Of course, the fact that Eun Yuri resurrected might have played a role in it as well.
Hopefully, Miss Phi Sora knows something. Just as he set out after organizing his thoughts, Sol Ji-hoo almost stopped. A hum? Because of a faint hum.
Although it was barely audible, it was most certainly a nasal hum. Looking back sneakily, he saw Eun Yuri following behind him. She nodded as she looked left and right, and a faint smile was hanging on her face.
Suddenly, the humming stopped.
Ah! Their eyes met. Realizing that Sol Ji-hoo was staring,
the smile on her face disappeared completely.
Eun Yuri pushed her snapback hat down as she lowered her head. This person. The more he looked at her, the stranger she seemed.
He could attribute a portion of her calmness to her recovering her lost memories, but shouldn't she be anxious about the tutorial changing?
She looked like she was having a blast, like a kid who was secretly happy after getting a surprise present.
Sol Ji-hoo wanted to ask what she was so happy about, but he could only swallow his words as he began to hear faint murmurings of people. Turning back to the front, he saw an orange lamppost emitting a cross-shaped light in the far distance.
It was the island lot. Asterisk. Marcel Guionia was standing on the path to the lot. He was nicely dressed in a black suit. He looked like he had questions to ask, but he paused when Sol Ji-hoo gestured at him with his eyes. In the next moment, he spoke courteously. Good job coming all the way here. You can go left. Thanks. You look great by the way. Sol Ji-hoo whispered as he passed Marcel Guionia. Hoo-hoo, thank you, representative.
Marcel Guionia also returned a quiet reply, but seeing as how Eun Yuri gave the two men a back-and-forth look, she must have heard the conversation between them. A bonfire was burning in the middle of the spacious lot.
People inside the lot were separated into two groups using a line drawn in the middle.
Sol Ji-hoo couldn't hide his surprise when he first saw it.
Wow!
There wasn't a single person on the left. That meant there were no other invited present.
Now this is a first.
Thanks for coming early. At that moment, a woman who was sitting on a chair next to the bonfire stood up.
Oh tilde.
Sol Ji-hoo's eyes widened.
It was Phi Sora wearing a silver suit, office skirt, and opaque stockings. Looking at her like this gave Sol Ji-hoo a whole other feeling. Oh, my ass. Phi Sora gritted her teeth. For some reason, an oval ocean-colored portal was situated next to her.
Did it have something to do with the tutorial's change?
Alright, now that all 75, or rather 76 people, are here.
Phi Sora sighed before scratching her head hard. She looked taken aback by the sudden change. Now that he thought about it, the 74 contracted were all dead silent. It wouldn't be strange for them to be discussing loudly after being summoned to such a strange place, but most of them were simply looking at Phi Sora in fear. Well, it's pretty obvious what happened. He didn't even need to look to know that Phi Sora must have lashed out and crushed their spirits. Judging by the huge cracks on the ground, she must have blown up grandly.
Arg! How am I supposed to explain this, really? I already have 1,000 things to do. Her mind must be in chaos.
How could it not, when the person who should be waiting in the neutral zone suddenly appeared in the tutorial, which also changed drastically?
Phi Sora clicked her tongue after glaring at Sol Ji-hoo resentfully. First, it looks like an explanation of the current situation is needed. You must be curious. Why we're on this shitty island instead of a school?
A few of the contracted nodded their heads.
They must have gotten an explanation on Earth. First, I'll read the message I got word by word. Phi Sora's eyes turned to the air. It seemed a separate message went to the guide just like Sol Ji-hoo predicted.
If the neutral zone is a place of learning and developing, then the tutorial is a place to screen your qualification to learn.
She spoke monotonously like she was reading a textbook.
But when a special invited is brought in with a special method, the tutorial can only lose its original intent. The first reason is that this implies that the invited has already proven their qualification.
The second reason is the existence of the helper. Phi Sora cleared her throat.
And thus, after much deliberation over many complex elements, the 7 gods agreed on a special arrangement for the specially summoned invited for this one-of-a-kind situation. However, this arrangement shall not be forced upon the invited.
They will have a choice.
After ending there, Phi Sora looked down.
You all can make a choice. Whether to stay here and start the special tutorial, or… She pointed to the blue portal before continuing.
To go back to where you're supposed to be and start the basic tutorial.
For the record, this applies to both contracted and invited, and this will be your choice to make. Miss Guide.
I have a question.
Sol Ji-hoo shouted as he shot his hand up. Phi Sora replied curtly.
What?
I understand what you're saying, but
what is the exact difference between the two? The difficulty. Phi Sora said clearly.
The special tutorial is incomparably more difficult than the basic tutorial. Supposedly, this special tutorial has the same difficulty as the neutral zone's very hard mission. Sol Ji-hoo instantly lost all his excitement. Very hard.
That's it? For Sol Ji-hoo's current strength, a very hard difficulty mission wouldn't even wake him up a day after he drank himself to sleep.
But,
however, Phi Sora foretold a twist next.
It says the difficulty may increase depending on the situation. And although there is only a low chance, certain conditions being met may make the difficulty increase to impossible. Sol Ji-hoo paused hearing the word, impossible.
Now this changed the story.
Is the difficulty the only thing that goes up? Of course not. Phi Sora shook her head.
The reward will naturally be proportional to the difficulty.
For the record, there is a world of difference between the rewards depending on the conditions met.
It says they're God's gifts that can be used not just in the tutorial, but also the neutral zone and even paradise.
They said there was a hidden space.
Sol Ji-hoo fell into thought.
In truth, he was already leaning heavily to one side.
By definition, an arrangement referred to plans or preparations for a future event.
In that case, rather than trying to screw us over, it was likely a way for them to give everything to them. It was easy to see from the way they were given a choice. This is a definite must. No matter how difficult the tutorial was, could it be harder than fighting the parasite's 7 armies? Having made up his mind, Sol Ji-hoo turned around. Eun Yuri also nodded without any complaints. There was no reason for her to refuse.
Because after hearing Kim Hana's explanation and also recovering her memories, she fully understood how incredible the man in front of her was.
So, are you guys doing the special tutorial? Of course.
That's what I thought.
Alright, first, take this. Phi Sora threw a piece of paper over.
The paper spun in the air before turning into a golden bag and a leather bag and falling in front of Eun Yuri.
There's a separate bag for the invited.
Apparently, it was prepared in case any of the contracted wanted to challenge the special tutorial.
Of course, that includes the invited. Phi Sora's voice rang out. I thought it normally wasn't given out.
That's in the basic tutorial, but here it's different.
It's probably because you'll all die as soon as the tutorial starts without it. Eun Yuri opened the golden bag. Necessary box X4. Mark of Survival X1. Diary of an Unknown Survivor X1. The vacant eyes lit up for the first time. Wow! She hugged the golden bag tightly. I think I just got something amazing.
Seeing her whisper quietly, Sol Ji-hoo grinned.
They're the bonus items given to a gold mark, after all. Phi Sora smacked her lips while looking at the duo. Anyway, that's it for the invited. I'll text you the rest of the details so read it later.
Supposedly, getting just one good reward here will let you live like royalty in the neutral zone.
With that, Phi Sora turned to the group on the right side. Now, let's see. The rest of you can follow me. I'll explain everything again once we get to the school auditorium. You see this portal, right?
Quote. I guarantee not a single one of you can pass this stage.
Because this stage wasn't made for you all to attempt it.
Quote. Well, if you have a death wish, I won't stop you. But you'd best follow me if you don't want to die.
Phi Sora turned around. Although she tried to enter the portal first, her feet stopped.
What are you doing?
Hurry up. The lot was still dead silent.
Hello? Are you listening?
Not a single one of the contracted moved.
A few flinched, but that was it.
They were all standing still like they were pinned to the ground.
Oh!
Phi Sora's eyebrow went up. Chapter 283. The empty lot was quiet.
Apart from the crackling sound of the bonfire and the sound of crickets chirping, it was quiet enough to be able to hear people breathing. A handsome young man finally broke the awkward silence. I have a question.
Although he raised his hand to ask for permission like Sol Ji-hoo, Phi Sora answered with a hard no. Answer my question first.
You sure you're speaking after listening to everything, right?
Well, yes or no?
Answer clearly.
Are you sure you've thought things through after hearing those two idiots' conversation and my warnings?
The young man slowly lowered his hand, scared from her cold and intense stare.
Yes.
You've got to be kidding me.
Phi Sora roughly wiped her face.
Her impatience started to show up in her expression.
I'm supposed to keep as many of them alive as possible and send them to the neutral zone.
Because that would increase the number of people they could get survival points out of.
In other words, it was less a matter of responsibility and more a matter of saving face. You're driving me insane. Listen, are you that eager to die?
Does this situation seem like some B-rated survival movie scene to you? Of course I don't want to die.
I don't see the situation that way either.
The young man's words carried a peculiar confidence in it.
Phi Sora clicked her tongue. If you're swayed by the whole reward thing, wake up.
As I said before, this stage wasn't made for you.
I did hear that. If you heard it, then why? Phew. Listen. Even the basic tutorial isn't easy. Once we get to the third stage, at least half of the people here will have failed. In the first place, there is only one invited and the rest are all contracted. I don't understand why you're so confident.
Because I'm a contracted, just like you said.
Maybe it's better to stay in the place that the invited chose. Phi Sora scoffed.
Bullshit.
Even I'm busy minding my own business here.
Do you think there are many invited that would help because you asked them so?
Plus, this stage was opened because those two fulfilled some unreasonable conditions. I'm sure they'd feel great about others making a profit out of it.
If that's what you think, then I apologize.
I didn't mean that they had to help necessarily. Although Phi Sora spat out words at him like a machine gun, the young man calmly answered. But anyway, don't we also have the right to choose? Just as you said, Miss Guide. He was speaking politely but did not lose an inch. Also, I heard that the guide has no authority to force us. Phi Sora's face slightly twitched. The guide could not say much in situations like this. So you're saying the guide should only guide?
Quote.
We'll deal with this ourselves, so just say what you've got to say and get lost.
That's what you mean, right?
I didn't say that. I apologize if I've upset you.
The young man said with a bright smile.
It did not seem like the attitude of someone apologizing at all. I also think it's better for you people to proceed with the basic tutorial.
Sol Jihu, after silently watching all this time, stepped in.
Even for him, it was better to proceed separately from the contracted.
That way, he could focus his attention on Yuri, and he would not have to be concerned with the contracted messing things up as they roamed around.
Of course, there was a sense of invasion as Phi Sora said.
After all, this special tutorial hidden piece was something that was activated by Yuri and his existence. The guide has the role of keeping as many people alive as possible and sending them all to the neutral zone safely. When we say, don't do this, there is a good reason for it. That was why Sol Jihu tried to persuade them to go back.
Why? The young man's expression turned strange. Ah, of course, I'm grateful that you opened this special stage.
And I understand that you want to keep it to yourself since you're the first one to find it.
The young man spoke loudly.
But as I said earlier, we have the right to choose. He claimed the right of choice while speaking loudly for everyone to hear. Don't get me wrong.
I'm not asking you to take care of us in the special tutorial.
All I'm saying is that we have the right to make our own decisions.
Oh ho.
The man had a rather glib tongue. With only a few words, he emphasized the value of the space that Phi Sora guaranteed and made it sound like Sol Jihu was trying to monopolize it.
The man's intentions were clear. It was obvious from the way he asked for approval and support from people around him, asking, "Don't you think so?" Everyone? Agitation. The underlying intention was to leave as many as people as possible in this stage and take control over them. It's still dangerous no matter whether you stay here or go there. But in the end, it's just the tutorial. It can't be harder than the next neutral zone stage, right? Sol Jihu could not help but laugh hearing the statement, "It's just the tutorial." I think it would be better for me to stay here risking the danger and taking it easy in the neutral zone rather than suffering in the neutral zone after proceeding with the basic tutorial. Therefore, I'm going to stay. Seeing as how he understood the situation to a certain degree, he must have paid attention to the explanation he was given. This would normally be a praiseworthy thing, but in this case, it only made the situation worse for him. But no matter what, the fact that the young man would not change his mind. In the end, all his words were out of ignorance. It's time to wake up and stop dreaming. At that moment Phi Sora jumped in. I was sharing useful insights out of kindness, but what? Ha. Alright, fine. Do whatever you want. Phi Sora stopped glaring at the young man and turned back to Sol Jihu. You stop too, dear. No matter what you say they won't listen if they're so dogged. Once they experience it themselves, they'll finally understand, "Ah, I fucked up."
Maintaining her mocking behavior filled with anger, Phi Sora furiously stared up at the sky. "You saw that, right?"
Although there was nothing up in the sky, it was obvious that her words were meant for the Earthlings who were watching the tutorial currently.
"Listen carefully.
I tried to stop them several times.
Don't you dare come at me later and ask why I didn't stop them, or I'll crack your heads open." After spitting out a threat, she took a deep breath and crossed her arms. "Anyways, no one wants to go back? This is your last chance."
The contracted were still motionless.
It was possible that people with some insight on the situation could be swayed by the young man's sweet words. Since the guide guaranteed that a single reward would allow them to live like kings in the neutral zone, it made sense for them to be enthralled.
But among the clueless people, there could be at least one person who wanted to proceed with the basic tutorial.
But because the general atmosphere was leaning towards staying in the special tutorial, it definitely would not be easy to speak up.
After all, sticking with a large crowd definitely seemed safer than proceeding alone. It was a simple crowd mentality. Of course, many of them were likely hoping to strike it rich as well. "Alright, then I'm not going to ask anymore. And the same goes for you guys.
You better not say nonsense like, 'Why didn't you stop us?'
And don't go asking those too, 'Why did you activate this space?'"
After growling at the crowd, Phi Sora started to call people one by one and threw invitation letters at them. Soon, dozens of leather bags fell from the sky. Phi Sora took out her cell phone after delivering some formal guiding announcements.
Thursday, March 22, 2018. Area 1. She pressed the screen. Starting the tutorial Stage 1, Island Escape.
She announced the start of the tutorial with a cold voice. Bzzz.
Phones all over the place vibrated. Sol Ji-hoo subconsciously looked back at Eun Yuri, then realized his mistake and turned back to the bonfire.
However, Phi Sora was already gone, and so was the portal.
Was she given a teleportation authority? Sol Ji-hoo left the question to be asked later and walked forward. Eun Yuri was staring at her phone screen. Sender, the guide. 1. Escape the island within the given time and gather on the way to the next island. 2. Time left 119 to 59, 45.
5 days.
They gave 5 days to escape the island when the time limit for the auditorium escape was only 3 hours.
Sol Ji-hoo asked with an unsure tone of voice.
Did the Diary of the Unknown Student, or rather Survivor, update? Yes, I'll show you.
Just as Eun Yuri lightly pressed on her screen. Did everyone see the message?
A cheerful voice filled the empty lot.
The duo's attention automatically followed the voice. The young man who was previously refuting Phi Sora stepped up. Once he took over the spot Phi Sora was standing at, Sol Ji-hoo started to find the situation interesting. It seemed that the man was trying to start taking control over the crowd, but whether it would work as well as he thought remained to be seen.
After all, agitating people and rallying them were entirely separate matters.
What does this mean? Island escape?
Do we have to escape from this island?
The young man answered without losing the smile on his face.
Island escape. It sounds quite tricky, but don't be afraid. Together we can all make it.
Then, if we all joined our forces.
Excuse me, wait a second.
As expected.
I get what you're saying.
But what are we supposed to do?
The person who cut him off stepped up.
The young man answered, still grinning, we should all join our forces. We can think our way through this together.
Wait, I thought you knew something about the situation. You talked about rewards in the neutral zone, didn't you?
That comes after the tutorial.
Were you not given an explanation before coming here? I don't know. I've never heard of it.
Anyways, we have a way to escape, right? The young man's face slowly lost its smile. It was a moonless night, and they were on an island so dark that they were not able to see anything.
Humans would naturally be frightened in such a situation.
Since the guide disappeared and the tutorial already started, it was only natural that the mood was getting increasingly tense. Can we get going?
It might be just me, but this island gives me the creeps. Murmur, murmur. The crowd grew louder in response to a young woman's urging.
If the young man wanted to ease the mood and earn trust from the crowd, he had to provide them with a solution that everyone could agree with.
Yuri was able to do so. She understood the situation fully and she had the privilege of accessing the diary of an unknown survivor, which made her capable of providing a clear direction.
But what about the young man?
He knew of nothing and had nothing. People there, quiet down. Someone voiced up at that moment.
Why are you all so loud?
Let the man say what he has to say.
The young man seemed relieved. At that moment, Sol Ji-hoo understood why the young man was so full of confidence.
So he had a companion.
They could have met up beforehand to plan, or they could have become allies after they entered.
But one thing was sure. The person that just spoke up stood on the young man's side.
What did you say? However, it backfired. What? Did I ever stop you?
Say what you have to say.
I never shut you off, did I?
So. Let's cooperate, let's join hands. Fine.
It all sounds wonderful, but don't make it so vague and say it clearly.
We stayed because of what that man said, so we have the right to know. What? Huh?
No one told you to stay. What did you just say? No one told us to stay?
Soon, the crowd broke out into chaos.
Wait.
Let's first get our bags.
The young man tried to calm the situation down, but the crowd did not relax.
I figured. Sol Ji-hoo became disappointed, having had his hopes that people would peacefully cooperate. He spoke too much.
If he showed that he was confident with his actions like Kong Sok, it would have at least been better.
Bluffing could not get one too far.
His extreme words to keep people into staying came back at him.
Once the situation gets to this stage
Why are y'all fighting? What a great start we've got here.
Of course, there should be one more person stepping up.
After all, the crowd was made of 70 people.
There was no way not a single person disapproved of the young man or saw through his intentions.
And who are you? Watch your mouth, young man.
Now, people, could I please get your attention?
Who are you to make us do anything?
Well, listen.
Let me first introduce myself.
My name is Kim Tae-hyun. I'm 42 and I'm a professional hiker.
Has anyone ever heard of mountaineering? As Sol Ji-hoo watched the middle-aged man standing his ground and facing the young man, Sol Ji-hoo sighed.
Looks like they're going to split into 2 or 3 teams.
Beginning to lose interest, he took the phone that Yuri gave him.
Sender, unknown. #empty lot. Diary of the Unknown Survivor, page 1.
I want to go back.
I want to return home.
I want to escape this goddamn island as soon as possible. But how?
There was no way out.
With the abrupt situation, we couldn't do anything.
One by one, people started to speak up while everyone was frightened. One side said we should just stay. The other side leaned towards leaving the empty lot. We couldn't agree on a decision.
What should I do here? Wait a minute, when did the fire die? Why isn't anyone saying anything all of a sudden? Not to brag or anything, but I've encountered several disasters while mountaineering. Some were pretty critical.
But me standing here right now means that I made it out every time. Along with companions that trusted and followed me. Although the professional hiker was sharing his experience, Sol Ji-hoo was focusing on something else.
The fire?
He checked the bonfire right away.
The fire had died. 5 days?
It isn't that big of a deal. We have so many people here. Look, I was once stranded in the Himalayas with only 8 people and we survived for 10 days. And do you know how I managed to survive through it all? Then. It was because we didn't have conflicts, we didn't fight. What's important is not waging a nerve war with the person next to you because you're stressed and scared. Whoosh. with the sound traveling through the dark swiftly. First, we need to accurately evaluate the situation we are in. Pook!
The voice cut off.
Chapter 284. The contracted failed to understand the situation.
Everything had happened so quickly, and they couldn't see properly due to the impenetrable darkness of the night.
A few people were wishfully thinking, the tutorial just started. What could happen so early on? Only a woman who was standing near the middle-aged man noticed that something was wrong and blinked slowly. Just now. She felt like something splattered on her face, almost like a sprinkler splashed water past her. The woman subconsciously raised her hand and rubbed her face. A crimson liquid that smelled like iron rubbed off on her fingers.
Just as she was about to ask what it was, her eyes widened.
The man who introduced himself as a professional hiker swayed greatly.
With his head drooped low, he staggered side to side like an inebriated man before suddenly falling down like a crumbling tower.
What? The woman looked down reflexively, her eyes clearly catching sight of an axe sticking out of the man's head. Her eyes shot open, as did her mouth. As a stifled breath and a horrified shriek surged up her throat. Pack! The woman abruptly fell with her eyes and mouth still petrified. Less than a few seconds afterward, another axe flew forward and cracked someone else's head open. The throws boasted an incredible accuracy. 3 people had died in an instant. At this point, the people who were standing like stone statues began to understand the situation.
Oh. Huh. What the hell was that? What's going on?
Fuck.
They're dead? They're really dead?
Murmur.
The contracted who had yet to accept reality shrunk back. But as if to mock the people instinctively backing away from the corpses, 4 more axes came flying in.
Whack!
Another man screamed and fell.
Perhaps because he was moving, the axe missed its mark and struck his shoulder. Though the man survived, he was writhing in pain on the ground like a caterpillar.
This time, everyone saw it clearly.
Oh. Ow. And starting from this point.
Somebody help. The crowd fell into a mass panic.
You-wah.
Some screamed.
Mom.
Some staggered back at a loss for what to do. Quote. Some fell on their butts, their complexions pale.
Save me. Save me. And some ran for their lives. A total pandemonium broke loose. All sorts of shrieks and shouting swirled through the empty lot. Meanwhile, the Axis were shooting down the survivors one by one. The sniper had yet to reveal himself. Sol Jihu's eyes narrowed. As expected. The special tutorial was completely different from the very beginning. In the basic tutorial, the survivors could buy time by blocking the auditorium door, but the special tutorial was merciless from the start. With the starting space being such a wide open area, the survivors were forced to face an unimaginable pressure from the get-go. What to do? It was too late to control the situation. The contracted were lost in fear, running away in all directions. Of course, Sol Jihu had no intention to control them in the first place. If he did, he would have done so a long time ago. In this situation, the only choice he had was killing the monster to minimize the damage or letting it be. Soon, after making up his mind, Sol Jihu turned to Un Yuri. It was then. Whoosh, whoosh. A sharp sound cutting through the air approached them. It seemed to be heading in Un Yuri's direction. HMPH, who do you think you're aiming at? He immediately moved to block the axe, but he realized soon after that it was unnecessary as Un Yuri lay flat on the ground like a frog with a calm face. The axe swirled through the air aimlessly before disappearing into the darkness. The other axes all went for people's heads, so I figured the same would happen to me. Un Yuri quickly hopped up and said as she picked up her bag. She must have been observing the situation calmly. She was certainly different than a simple contracted, perhaps because she had experienced the tutorial and the neutral zone before. Sol Ji-hoo felt himself liking Eun Yuri more and more as he pulled on her arm. "Come on, let's get out of here first."
While everyone else was running around shrieking in a panic, only the duo of the man and woman left the lot through the chaos.
Of course, Sol Ji-hoo didn't forget to pick up an axe from the ground before he left.
After leaving the lot, Sol Ji-hoo and Eun Yuri did not say anything for a long time. By the time the disturbance at the lot was slowly subsiding, Sol Ji-hoo, who was leading the way, spoke.
"I think the diary of an unknown survivor is the most overpowered item in the tutorial." Although he managed to break the silence, no reply came back.
But he didn't mind it too much because he wasn't expecting a reply anyway. He continued. "That diary updates its contents depending on what situation you're in.
You should read it carefully every time something is added. You'll notice a hint or two if you look carefully." The same, no answer. Looking back, Sol Ji-hoo saw Eun Yuri nodding her head. He still couldn't read her thoughts from her face.
"Should we have helped?"
The nodding stopped. Sol Ji-hoo inwardly admitted that this was a slightly cruel question, but he was still curious about Eun Yuri's opinion.
After a moment of silence, Eun Yuri spoke.
"I think you had a reason," she replied politely in a quiet voice.
Sol Ji-hoo smiled at the roundabout answer. The participants of the tutorial are free to cooperate, but they are also competitors. You must know what I'm talking about since you've experienced the third stage. In truth, it wouldn't be bad to help them. After all, helping others was also a criterion that was judged. Knowing how helpful Adelet Delphine was back when they were in the neutral zone, he might have helped the others out if they were partaking in the basic tutorial.
But the situation had changed. With the opening of the special tutorial, the rewards they could get multiplied. Naturally, ways to earn survival points must have increased as well. So judging that they could gather enough survival points even without helping the contracted, Sol Ji-hoo had decided to prioritize monopolizing the special rewards. Only, he was curious about Eun Yuri's reaction.
"How could you not save people who are dying in front of you?"
"I'm disappointed. I won't enter your organization." Sol Ji-hoo would have had a headache if she'd suddenly said that. Of course, she wouldn't openly say such a thing unless she was completely crazy. But as always, it was hard to guess what someone was thinking. To be honest, even if we helped them, they might come back to bite us. Although some people recognize favors and return them, there are also people who feel like they're entitled to them. At least, that's how it was with me.
"You're right." This time, she answered right away.
Sol Ji-hoo gave a sideways glance at Eun Yuri. In fact, some people mistakenly think they're owed favors.
He expected her to nod silently just like before, but this time, she revealed her thoughts clearly. Though not even a day had passed since they met, Sol Ji-hoo's evaluation of Eun Yuri's personality was quiet. She seemed to be someone who rarely expressed her emotions, did not interfere in others' matters, and only said and acted when absolutely necessary. He didn't know what she experienced in the neutral zone to act like this, but she seemed to know the inner workings of paradise.
I really want to know about her disposition. Looking forward to the moment when the tutorial would end, Sol Ji-hoo spoke. I said all that because I didn't know what you would think. But at the end of the day, I wanted to focus more on Miss Eun Yuri. That's it. He didn't say his lingering thoughts, because this tutorial is a stage for you and me. He was too embarrassed to say it. Eun Yuri lowered her head slightly. Yes, she murmured in a tiny voice. She was acting unperturbed, but perhaps she was a bit shy as well. Chuckling to himself, Sol Ji-hoo looked around the area. Let's sit down for a bit. Eun Yuri sneaked a glance back. She must be thinking, we're already resting? We just left the lot. There's something we need to do first, opening the gift boxes. While we're at it, we can see what's in the leather bag too. One reason Sol Ji-hoo favored Eun Yuri was that she was quick to understand. Knowing exactly what Sol Ji-hoo wanted, Eun Yuri sat down, pulled down her bag,
and took out the necessary boxes.
If she were in the military, she would undoubtedly be a great recruit. The necessary box is a bonus item that gives what you need the most.
What I need the most?
Eun Yuri's eyes lit up as she repeated Sol Ji-hoo's words in a daze.
Though Sol Ji-hoo did not know what, it seemed there was something she really wanted. Sol Ji-hoo continued, thinking, it's probably not snacks.
When I went through the tutorial, I only got 3 necessary boxes in addition to the survival points included initially. We figured you wouldn't need the survival points, so we added another box. Got it. If you open the box, a bonus item will pop out automatically. Can you open one up and tell me what you got? Eun Yuri opened a box right away. The box melted away and Eun Yuri's eyes headed midair.
Mana circuit application. Quote. Something called Mana circuit application was added to my status window.
Ah,
an ability. Sol Ji-hoo tilted his head.
He himself had a powerful mana circuit thanks to Psyche's tears, but mana circuit application? It was an ability he had never heard before.
This is the first time I've heard about it. Deciding to investigate it later, Sol Ji-hoo suggested that she open the remaining boxes.
Coincidentally, all 3 boxes turned into paper talismans.
He was hoping to get at least 1 paper talisman, but Sol Ji-hoo fell into thought when 3 came out.
Should I be happy? Meanwhile, Eun Yuri opened the leather bag.
There was only 1 item inside, a rope with a blue glow. It says it's a rope that can neutralize a killer.
Eun Yuri explained as she held the rope in her hands. A piece of info came out. She said killer, not Geikwi.
Well, I expected as much when I saw the axe. Given that the difficulty had gone up, it only made sense for the monster to be far stronger than the Geikwi.
It was then.
SSK.
The rustling of grass was heard. Sol Ji-hoo's ears perked up as his senses were drawn back. It's from the direction of the lot.
Sol Ji-hoo stood up with the hand axe.
The sound quickly drew closer.
Judging by the heavy steps, it seemed this person had no intention of hiding their presence.
Was it a killer or a survivor? The answer was revealed soon.
The tall grass swayed left and right, and a slender figure popped out.
He was a head taller than Sol Ji-hoo and had unnaturally long arms and legs.
This being didn't look like a human even at a glance. He had gray skin with blackish-red spots that made him look like a rotting corpse.
Other than that, the only strange thing was that he was wearing a white mask with holes for the eyes only.
Just like that, the killer revealed himself.
I didn't think he'd chase after us. Sol Ji-hoo clicked his tongue and activated the 9 eyes. Immediately, he furrowed his brows.
Green?
He had expected the killer to be yellow at the very least. BZZ. A cell phone buzzed. He's the axe killer, it says.
The diary of an unknown survivor must have been updated as Eun Yuri relayed the information right away. It says, he enjoys killing survivors with various weapons, and especially enjoys killing escaping survivors by throwing an axe.
Also, Eun Yuri continued quickly. He apparently cherishes his axes so much that he chases after anyone that takes them. Aha! Sol Ji-hoo finally realized why the killer chased after them.
As if to prove Eun Yuri right, the killer held his left hand out.
He was telling Sol Ji-hoo to hand over the axe. I picked it up because I didn't have a weapon. Sol Ji-hoo smacked his lips. It was a mistake if he could call it that. Was he green because he would quietly turn back once he got his axe?
But that doesn't make much sense.
Sol Ji-hoo decided to test it. Here. He threw the axe over. Sorry for taking it. I didn't have a weapon, you see. I picked it up since it was convenient. Eun Yuri doubted her ears. Just what was this person trying to do?
Do you happen to have a spear?
I understand you treasure your axes, but a spear should be fine, right? I'd appreciate it greatly.
The killer did not budge an inch after retrieving his axe.
His bloodshot pupils were staring at Sol Ji-hoo through the holes in the mask.
While Sol Ji-hoo wasn't sure he spoke human language, the killer seemed to have a somewhat dumbfounded expression as well.
Sol Ji-hoo laughed wryly as he scratched his head.
I mean, there's nothing I can do if you don't want to.
But I'd be happy even with a javelin, so. Yuri opened her mouth, stuttering.
Wait.
The diary says he's the most dangerous one among the killers. It says he kills the survivors on the spot without playing around with them.
What? Sol Ji-hoo blinked rapidly. Among the killers?
In the first place, Sol Ji-hoo had no intention of getting rid of the killer.
Why? Because that would make the tutorial trivial. The killer had to run amok so that the other survivors wouldn't dare to touch the special rewards. That was why Sol Ji-hoo purposely left the killer at the lot without killing him. But this changes the story.
Right, since the difficulty went up, it wouldn't be strange even if there were several killers.
This also meant killing one early on wouldn't pose much of a problem.
Are you sure? Sol Ji-hoo turned his head halfway and asked.
That there are multiple killers.
Yuri's eyes widened. Because at the same time that Sol Ji-hoo turned to look at her. Kya ha!
The axe-wielding killer rushed in like a bolt of lightning.
See careful. As the shocked Yuri shouted. Kukikikik.
The killer instantly closed the distance and swung the axe down with a scornful laugh. It was then.
Chapter 285. Talk. The shocked Yuri's eyes waned. She expected the axe to split Sol Ji-hoo's head in half, yet nothing happened. No, it wasn't exactly nothing. Now that she took another look, the killer's wrist was held in place mid-air. The reason it took her so long to realize this was because Sol Ji-hoo was still looking at her. He had stopped the attack without even looking at it.
You're sure, right?
He asked again as if nothing happened. Staring dazedly, Yuri nodded.
Sol Ji-hoo turned back.
Ha, little brat.
The arm in Sol Ji-hoo's hand trembled. It was only a few centimeters away from its intended target, but there was a terrifying pressure completely holding it in lockdown.
The killer couldn't help but feel that its hand was stuck inside a boulder. Key.
As he struggled desperately, the axe began to go down by microscopic lengths. But when the intrigued Sol Ji-hoo tightened his grip, even that came to a complete stop. Sol Ji-hoo never used his mana.
His strength stat was intermediate. Even though this was a special tutorial, his strength wasn't something that could be withstood by a monster that wouldn't last a day in the ancient emperor's villa. Crack! In the end, the killer spat out a groan with a loud crack. This wouldn't have happened if you didn't follow us.
Sol Ji-hoo twisted the killer's wrist without dragging things out.
Croc! Kua! The killer shrieked.
He must have a sense of pain as he was writhing in agony.
Although he still managed to seize the axe in his left hand and swing it. Nice try. He let go of the axe when a powerful punch twisted into his stomach. When Sol Ji-hoo dealt another blow in the same spot without a break, the killer fell on his knees with a thud. Once a swift kick swept past his lower jaw, he collapsed completely. So he was green because he was weak.
He must have posed no threat unless Sol Ji-hoo knowingly pulled his neck out and said, "Please kill me." As Sol Ji-hoo was hoping for a thrilling life-or-death battle, he couldn't help but shake his head in disappointment. At the end of the day, this was the tutorial.
There were thousands of things to do in the neutral zone. It was better to take the easy route and get there as quickly as possible.
Krrrrrr.
The axe killer bared his teeth and glared at Sol Ji-hoo.
Don't show your teeth.
However, Sol Ji-hoo's foot slammed down on the glaring killer's teeth and shattered them completely. Bzz, bzz.
The phone vibrated again.
Sol Ji-hoo had no clue what was updated but was observing the killer's waist closely.
Just like Yuri said, several weapons were hanging there.
Unfortunately, he did not see a spear.
No spear? Why don't you carry one around?
Woo! Woo!
A sorrowful cry flowed out, but Sol Jihu clenched his fist grumpily.
Shut up, bastard! Thwack! Once he delivered a powerful hook to the killer's bloody mouth, the killer quickly became silent. Sol Jihu picked up a machete before giving it a few swings and turning back to Un Yuri. Do you want to deal the finishing blow? That should be enough to get you some points. Un Yuri shook her head vehemently.
Oh, then I guess I'll kill him.
No.
That's not it. As Sol Jihu stepped on the killer and raised his machete, Un Yuri ran up to him in a hurry and held his arm.
Look at this. Un Yuri showed her phone to the confused Sol Jihu. Sender, unknown. #Forest. Diary of an Unknown Survivor, page 22. We're already on page 22. Sol Jihu was somewhat surprised at their progress as he calmly read the content. We finally got rid of the killer. Although 2 of us got hurt, we all shook in excitement knowing the killer who made us tremble in fear was dead. Someone suggested holding the killer captive while discussing what to do with him. But how could we?
Everyone happily joined in on hacking the killer to death. As the killer screamed its last breath, black smoke shot out of his body and disappeared into the far distance.
Was an evil spirit possessing the killer's body?
The important thing was that this damned killer was finally dead.
We all laughed and celebrated victory for the first time in a while. We should be able to get some sweet sleep tonight. Less than an hour later, something absurd happened. Damn it! She was right.
The 6th mother is angry.
We shouldn't have taken the killer's life with our hands.
After reading the diary, Sol Jihu understood why Un Yuri stopped him. It was spelled out for him that a survivor should not kill the killer with their own hands. The 6th mother is angry? He didn't know the meaning of this sentence, but now it didn't feel right to kill him so easily. Perhaps killing the killers was one of the conditions for increasing the tutorial's difficulty. So I shouldn't underestimate this tutorial?
Well, let's see how amazing the rewards are then. Sol Jihu grumbled inwardly while lowering the machete. He didn't want to kill the killer, but he didn't want to release him either. Just as he was wondering what to do. Un Yuri carefully held up the rope. Sol Jihu's eyes lit up. Ah, that rope is supposed to neutralize the killer, right? Yes. He wondered what use it would have when he first saw it, but now he understood. Un Yuri tied up the killer on her own even though Sol Jihu didn't say anything. He expected her to simply spin the rope around the killer, but she surprisingly made a tortoiseshell bind. Her hands moved very naturally. BZZ, BZZ. Sender, unknown. #Forest. Diary of an Unknown Survivor, page 24. We captured another killer. The losses this time were greater due to the killer's increased strength. This time, to not repeat the same mistake, we tied up the killer with a rope. But what should we do? How can we eliminate the killer without the 6th mother finding out? We need to look for a way. But the killer's howls are too noisy. We need to hurry up and do something about it. The Diary of the Unknown Survivor updated again. Sol Jihu focused on the phrase, without the 6th mother finding out. Suddenly, more information was revealed. Sol Jihu spoke, thinking that they needed some time to reorganize themselves before taking further action. Let's get a move on first. Ah, give that here. Sol Jihu took over the rope, opened the map, then started walking while dragging the bound killer on the ground. 15 spots were marked on the map. Except for the 3 marks that had special shapes, the rest were all shaped like a house. Walking to the nearest house mark, just as expected, Sol Jihu saw a cabin with its lights turned off. Due to the entire island being covered in a forest, the cabin looked more like a cabin from a horror movie than a vacation cabin. Sender, unknown. #cabin. Diary of the Unknown Survivor, page 2. We chanced upon a cabin while frantically running away. Only after walking inside and locking the front and back door did we breathe a sigh of relief.
Finding shelter is nice and all, but what are we supposed to do from now?
No, snap out of it.
There must be a way out.
Let's search around the cabin first. There might be something useful. We should leave the lights turned off, right? This cabin isn't necessarily safe, so we should be careful not to attract unwanted attention. Sol Ji-hoo threw the axe killer somewhere nearby and entered the cabin.
Just like the diary said, he locked the front and back door. Only, he turned the lights on.
The cabin had 2 floors and was about 130 square meters in size.
Sol Ji-hoo and Eun Yuri searched the cabin thoroughly, but contrary to their expectations, there was nothing other than a little bit of canned food and 2 bottles of water.
Although they also found a map, it was unnecessary since they had the diary of the unknown survivor.
Once the search ended, Sol Ji-hoo looked for Eun Yuri.
She was fiddling around with a paper talisman.
The paper talismans are like the necessary boxes. The spell you need the most in your current situation will activate.
Eun Yuri flinched. She put the talismans away like a child who was caught doing something wrong.
I wasn't going to use any.
It's fine. I was hoping for 1, but we got 3.
Just save 1 and you can use the other ones whenever you want. Sol Ji-hoo said with a smile. Oh, by the way, are you hungry?
Do you want anything to eat? Eun Yuri shook her head. Or you can sleep for an hour or 2. You must be tired. Shake, shake.
Sol Ji-hoo shrugged.
All right, then let's talk. He sat down in the dusty living room. Once Eun Yuri sat down as well, he took out his cell phone. Let me explain what we're going to do from now on. He pointed to each of the 3 special marks on the map.
Bridge, car, and ship. That's what they look like, right?
Well, it could be a boat. Anyway, these 3 are probably ways to get out of this island. Right. Taking a bridge at the end of the island, hopping on a car to throw off the pursuing killers and taking an escape through the center of the island in a roundabout way, or getting on a ship and sailing away.
They all make sense.
But, they probably won't be easy.
Quote.
There must be traps or schemes that would hinder us. No matter which, the tutorial probably won't let us escape so easily.
Remembering the trap on the stairway to the 2nd floor and the steel bars that blocked the way to the gathering point, Eun Yuri nodded right away. To be honest, escaping this island isn't all that difficult.
Sol Ji-hoo crossed his arm. If we set our mind to it, we can even leave this instant.
But both Sol Ji-hoo and Eun Yuri knew that should not be done.
Although I'm not sure whether one exists on this island, we have to find a hidden space.
There's a good chance that the special reward will be in this hidden stage.
Sol Ji-hoo smacked his lips.
But I can't figure out just where it could be. There's nothing on the map that looks out of place. How troubling.
Sol Ji-hoo sighed as he tapped the screen. If only we had a clue. Eun Yuri murmured to herself.
After much thought, she looked at Sol Ji-hoo and held her breath. Suddenly. That doesn't mean there is nothing for you to do, Miss Eun Yuri.
There's one thing you need to remember no matter what. What Kim Hana said to her crossed her mind. With a moment of hesitation, Eun Yuri carefully spoke. I think there is a clue. Sol Ji-hoo's eyes widened. It's just what I think, but can I still tell you about it?
Yes, of course.
Eun Yuri spoke calmly. First, given the information we have so far, I think there are 5 killers. Why? Page 22.
The 6th mother is angry. This part.
Eun Yuri swiped her cell phone and turned the diary of the unknown survivor to page 22. I think mother in this context is metaphorical.
Sol Ji-hoo rubbed his chin.
The earth is the mother of all things. Something like that? Yes.
The way I interpret it, there are 5 killers, the 1st to 5th, and the 6th mother must be the one controlling them.
What are the chances there is a mother for each of the killers? In that case, there might be at least 6 killers.
I considered that when I first read page 22, but the next page that opened up showed that this wasn't true.
Yuri turned to page 24. We captured another killer.
How can we get rid of the killer without the sixth mother finding out?
As you can see, they captured a killer after the first one they killed. 2 killers were gotten rid of, but the sixth mother was mentioned in both.
Sol Jihu was astonished.
Ah, so that's why. I think this sixth mother is related to the hidden space. Sol Jihu's eyebrow went up.
The contents of page 22 and page 24 can be connected. If a survivor kills a killer, the sixth mother will find out and become angry.
Right. Sol Jihu then thought, if they wanted to eliminate the killers, they needed to find a way to avoid the sixth mother's detection. Otherwise, the sixth mother's rage would cause the remaining killers to get stronger.
However, what Yuri said next revealed that her thoughts were different. When you captured the axe killer before, was there anyone near you?
No, I don't think so.
If the sixth mother wasn't there, how would she know that the killer was killed?
Well, I suppose they can communicate somehow. A link that only the killers and the sixth mother share. Yuri quietly stared at Sol Jihu. I think so too.
But you said before that the diary of the unknown survivor updates depending on the situation and that I should read it carefully because it may contain hidden hints.
Ah. Yes, I did.
If there is a reason that this part was included in the diary, then I think it has to be the hint.
Yuri turned to another page and pointed at the 2 lines. Sol Jihu clenched the hand he was rubbing his chin with. He felt like he understood what Yuri was saying. But how did she plan on finding the hidden space?
He leaned forward, intrigued by what Yuri had to say. Can you explain in detail?
Yes, I'll tell you now. Yuri cleared her throat. Next, she slowly explained her plan.
Soon, when the explanation came to an end, Sol Jihu's brows narrowed.
Yuri stared at Sol Jihu nervously, like a student awaiting the result of a test.
After a moment of silence, Sol Jihu took his eyes off of the cell phone and raised his head.
He looked at Yuri with a renewed gaze.
Kim Hannah said she was a college student?
Miss Yuri.
Suddenly curious, Sol Jihu asked.
What's your college major? Yuri tilted her head but answered flatly.
It's modern dance. Why do you ask? Chapter 286. Modern dance major, huh?
It was an answer that was outside his expectations, but it didn't matter. Nothing. I just thought you'd be a student at a police academy. Or a police science major, at least, one.
Sol Jihu let out a laugh before replying. He then let out a long sigh and started to think while clasping both hands together and rubbing his thumbs.
He knew what she was getting at. The problem was whether it was possible or not. Silence fell again. Woo! Woo! Only the howling of the killer they had thrown outside the back door could be heard. While Sol Jihu's face grew more solemn as he fell deeper into his thoughts, Yuri gently waved her hand. It was just my opinion.
There's no need to do it if it's too difficult.
No, that's not it.
Sol Jihu shook his head.
It's not a bad plan.
If it works, it's good for us, and if it doesn't, well, it won't be without any risks, but I think I can manage.
Quote. The problem is whether it's possible or not. I've actually also been summoned from Earth, so all my artifacts and equipment were left behind in paradise.
After saying so, Sol Jihu organized his thoughts.
According to the diary of an unknown survivor, they managed to successfully catch another killer after killing the first one.
From the contents of this entry, it wasn't likely that the difficulty of the tutorial would suddenly rise to an impossible level even if they killed off one of them.
It was probably correct to assume that the remaining killers gradually increased in strength whenever they killed one.
If that's the case,
Sol Jihu finally decided after thinking hard about it. It sounds good.
I think it's at least worth a try.
Maybe they could really find a hidden space. If Un-yuri was correct, the rest of the tutorial would become much easier. He began to get fired up.
Sol Ji-hoo brightly smiled and spoke.
Since we happen to have what we need, should we start right away? Yes. Just when the two of them stood up simultaneously as if on cue. Kong kong, kong 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 kong. They suddenly heard someone banging on the door.
Sol Ji-hoo and Un-yuri reflexively turned to stare at the front door before quietly looking at each other.
Click, click. They could also hear someone trying to open the door. It sounded like the person was in a hurry.
When Sol Ji-hoo signaled Un-yuri by placing his index finger on his lips, Un-yuri silently nodded her head.
Sol Ji-hoo crept towards the front door as silently as possible. Quote. Was it his imagination that he heard a faint sound from outside the door? The color is green, but…
Sol Ji-hoo gently put his ear on the door.
Help! Please help me! A struggling voice. Whoever's inside. The lights were on. Please, help me! The voice came and went intermittently as if it was on the verge of being snuffed out.
The man seemed to be dying, judging by his shortness of breath.
It might be a killer trying to trick us by sounding like a survivor. No, wait. It didn't matter even if it was a killer.
After Sol Ji-hoo muttered to himself, he tightly gripped his machete.
When he stepped back after opening the locks, the door slid open as a large man collapsed into the room. It seemed like the man had been leaning on the door. Kiyu. Ah! Sol Ji-hoo frowned after seeing the man convulsing on the ground. He could tell at first glance that his condition was critical.
Besides the numerous stab wounds all over his body, there were many holes with teeth marks scattered across his limbs. They looked as if something had sunk its teeth into him and chewed until his flesh hung in tatters.
Are you all right?
He quickly kneeled on one knee to examine the man's wounds, but there was nothing he could do for him at the moment. Sol Ji-hoo wasn't a priest, nor did he have any medical supplies with him. Rather, it was doubtful whether he could be saved even if he had the supplies.
His injuries were so severe that he was surprised the man had made it this far. Please, please save me.
The man desperately pleaded with a dying voice. What happened?
Were you attacked by the killer?
I don't know.
I was caught while running from the lot.
He was caught? The axe killer had chased after Sol Ji-hoo and Un-yuri.
In other words, it meant that the man had been caught by another killer. Can you give us more details?
The man's eyes trembled.
Looking at him now,
he resembled a large dog with his big stature and gentle eyes.
You. He opened and closed his mouth before scrunching his face. Kook, he let out a moan. Be careful. His voice became a little clearer as he forcibly squeezed out the words.
Be careful?
Yes.
The killer, he put me here. Sol Ji-hoo's eyes narrowed.
As for the reason, I don't know either. The bastard placed me in front of this cabin and then he suddenly disappeared.
The man continued with great difficulty while gasping for breath.
Was there anything else that was strange?
Ah! I feel like I've heard a strange howl.
A howl. Sol Ji-hoo was jolted back to his senses as soon as he heard that.
Now that he thought about it, the axe killer's howls had abruptly ceased at some point.
Suddenly, the diary of an unknown survivor flashed past his mind. We need to look for a way. But the killer's howls are noisy. We need to hurry up and do something about it. No way. Miss Un-yuri. When he stood back up and turned around, he saw Un-yuri ripping a sheet she had dusted into long strips. Stay here. Sol Ji-hoo flew out the door as he said that. Lightning sparked from his feet as he stamped the ground. Pang!
As expected, when he tore through the back door,
he could see another killer squatting next to the axe killer, attempting to untie it.
As the ropes were tied around the axe killer in a tortoise-shell binding, making it hard to unravel, the killer had given up trying to use his hands and resorted to ripping it apart with his teeth.
You bastard!
The killer raised his head in surprise as Sol Ji-hoo immediately rushed towards them. However, its opponent was too fast.
Sol Ji-hoo transformed into a ray of light as he bolted towards the killer and swung his machete. Pock! Before the killer could respond, the machete slashed across its neck. The killer fell on its side without being able to even scream. Its body started convulsing as a fountain of blood sprouted from its neck. Woo! Woo!
The axe killer started to howl again once he saw its companion fail in its rescue.
Did the diary entry mean this when they said they had to quickly do something? Who knew that the killer would try to call its companions to make an escape? Sol Ji-hoo and Eun Yuri had almost lost the necessary material for their plan.
This says it's the cannibal killer.
Sol Ji-hoo heard a voice from the back door as he was sighing in relief.
Eun Yuri was looking at Sol Ji-hoo while holding her phone.
Cannibal. He didn't have to read the diary to guess.
How's the man? He fainted.
He's still breathing, so I assume he's alive, but… Eun Yuri trailed off. Sol Ji-hoo clicked his tongue as he shook the blood off the machete.
Bandages and disinfectants were probably not enough to heal the man, and going to the neutral zone was also out of the question.
The only way to save him was to find something equivalent to a high-rank healing potion. He wasn't sure, but he could only think of one place that might have such an item. Are you fine with leaving right now?
Yes. I'd prefer that actually.
Okay, then.
Sol Ji-hoo glanced down. They suddenly had two materials available, although one seemed to be on the verge of death.
Sol Ji-hoo first went inside to examine the fainted man. Eun Yuri had wrapped his body in multiple strips of fabric to stop his bleeding before hiding him under the bed. That was the best they could do for now. It was all up to the man to endure before Sol Ji-hoo returned with an adequate healing item. After extinguishing the lights and tightly closing the door to the mountain cabin, Sol Ji-hoo asked Eun Yuri to tie the axe killer back up. Sol Ji-hoo chuckled seeing Eun Yuri tie the killer back into the tortoise-shell bind. Do they teach this in modern dance nowadays? In any case, it was all good since it delayed the killer from saving its companion. When she finished tying the killer up, Sol Ji-hoo took the end of the rope and tied it tightly around his waist. He then circulated his mana, causing electricity to spark all over his body. Watching the electric discharge with curious eyes, Eun Yuri blinked rapidly. No way, are you planning to bring it along?
Yes, we can't have him escape.
Sol Ji-hoo continued while stretching his waist and rotating his ankles. I think it would be good to have a spare. Still. It's fine. Running is my specialty among specialties. Sol Ji-hoo grinned as he passed her the machete. I've run with dozens of logs tied to me. I've also hit different colored stones thrown in the air while using flash thunder. Anyways, this much isn't anything. Eun Yuri tilted her head but still took the machete.
Can you kill? Yes, may I?
Of course.
But immediately afterward.
Sol Ji-hoo jumped in place a couple of times to warm up and patted his chest. Eun Yuri lowered her head to look down at the cannibal killer while tightly gripping the machete. Sup. She quietly took a breath before stabbing down the machete without hesitation. The blade accurately pierced through the wound that Sol Ji-hoo made before. The cannibal killer trembled before its convulsions quickly stopped. Eun Yuri gripped the handle with both hands and twisted it left and right to force out the machete. She had better skills than he had expected. Guo! A death throw sounded. Following that, a dark smoke slipped out of the killer's body, just like the diary of an unknown survivor had described. It climbed high in the skies like smoke rising out from a chimney, then speedily moved towards a certain direction. Miss Eun Yuri. Sol Ji-hoo called out to Eun Yuri without taking his eyes off of the smoke. When Eun Yuri hurriedly came towards him, he lifted her up, supporting her back and calves in a princess carry. Hold on tight. After seeing Eun Yuri nod her head, Sol Ji-hoo lowered his stance. "We're off." And the moment he heavily stamped the ground, "Chalk!"
Sol Ji-hoo's figure abruptly shot forward, accompanied by a clap of thunder.
It was a speed that could not be followed by the average person.
Only the direction he was moving in could be estimated by the mad flinging of the axe killer tied to Sol Ji-hoo's waist, as it was flying up and down like a mad seesaw.
"Mommy!" Un Yuri uttered a belated cry of surprise, terrified at the speed that far surpassed her imagination.
At last, she hastily wrapped her arms around Sol Ji-hoo's neck. "It looks like she's right." To sum up Un Yuri's plan in one word, it was pursuit. She had deduced that there was a connection between the killers and the sixth mother, pointing out 2 sentences in the diary as evidence. As the killer screamed its last breath, black smoke shot out of its body and disappeared into the far distance. How can we eliminate the killer without the sixth mother finding out?
If these lines were intentionally placed in the entry like Un Yuri said, there was definitely a relationship between the sixth mother and the killers.
This was why she suggested killing one of the killers and following the black smoke when it came out. There was a possibility of the killer's soul returning back to where the sixth mother was to inform her of its death.
And the place where the sixth mother is hiding is likely to be the hidden space. It was a plan that an ordinary person couldn't even dream of. However, Sol Ji-hoo was different from any other survivor.
He was a level 5 earthling possessing a movement technique called Flash Thunder, an upgraded version of the Flash Steps. It was too bad he didn't have his Festina earring with him, but as Sol Ji-hoo had said before, running was his specialty. He had been forced to run with his stamina already depleted, across volcanic areas and places known for their rugged topography like the huge stone Rocky Mountain, all the while carrying sandbags and dragging tens of logs.
Crossing a forest while dragging a single, scrawny killer was the same as sprinting on flat ground for him. Thanks to Jang Maldong's hellish training, Sol Ji-hoo could maintain the use of Flash Thunder to follow the smoke. How long had he been running for?
The black smoke flew across the sky for a long time before it finally started to descend as a large mountain next to the ocean came into view.
It dropped straight down like it was crash landing before disappearing somewhere near the waist of the mountain.
The cannibal killer has been killed by a certain survivor.
The sixth mother is angry. The remaining killers will become stronger. Their movement speeds have increased.
The sixth mother's rage has been transmitted to the killers.
The remaining killers will now drop everything to chase the murderer upon sight.
A series of messages were suddenly heard.
Damn! Sol Ji-hoo flew in pursuit before stopping to look around the area where the smoke had vanished.
It was dark, but thanks to his improved vision after eating the golden wind phoenix, he could distinguish the shapes around him relatively clearly.
Only, the smoke was nowhere to be seen. At that moment, Sol Ji-hoo found a wisp of smoke rushing past his waist. Sol Ji-hoo quickly chased it to a cliff covered by thick vines and strangely shaped stones.
There, he clearly saw the smoke disappearing into a cave carved into the cliff, facing the sea. The axe killer has been killed by a certain survivor. The sixth mother is furious. The remaining killers' 5 senses will sharpen. They will be able to find the locations of the survivors more quickly.
The killers become more hostile. One of the killers will start looking for the murderer that killed its companions.
Oh! The axe killer died?
I didn't even hear its death throes.
Sol Ji-hoo subconsciously looked behind him. A sack of meat was hanging at the end of the rope tied around his waist.
It was a corpse that was pitiful to look at with its entire body mangled and ripped apart. Ah!
Sol Ji-hoo finally understood what had happened. The smoke that had disappeared into the cave just now was the soul of the axe killer that had given up its breath after he had arrived at the mountain.
It seemed to have died after being smashed around on its way here. Un Yuri was protected by Sol Ji-hoo, but the killer had practically been tied behind a horse sprinting at full speed.
He had focused all his attention on following the smoke that he completely forgot about it.
Whatever.
The killer had only been a material they needed to use to locate the hidden space.
Sol Ji-hoo shook Un-yuri, who was in his arms, while looking at the dark cave which was 10 meters in front of him. "Miss Un-yuri. Miss Un-yuri. BZZ, BZZ."
Hearing the phone buzzing just in time, Sol Ji-hoo lowered his gaze with a happy expression.
1. Police science is an actual major taught at the Police Academy, University in Korea. If you are interested in reading up more, then check the Wikipedia article for Korean National Police University, and the section, Academics, for more info. Chapter 287. Un-yuri's condition looked worse than he expected.
Her hair was a mess, thanks to the wind tossing it all over the place, and her eyes were slightly cracked open, looking at the sky in a daze.
Kook. Kook.
It seemed she was on the verge of passing out, especially given the trickle of saliva dripping off her mouth. Then again, even if this wasn't her first time in paradise, she had yet to step out of the neutral zone. It was no wonder she was like that, especially after experiencing a movement skill that flashed through short distances at the speed of lightning, multiple times in succession.
Ah. Ah.
Nevertheless, Un-yuri had somehow managed to cling onto her conscientiousness and proceeded to take out her phone with trembling hands.
Sender, unknown. Hashtag Coastal Cliffs. Diary of an Unknown Survivor, page 30.
One of our companions went missing while we were searching the mountain for a way to deal with the killers.
He was nowhere to be found no matter how hard we searched. We finally managed to find a trace of our lost companion after searching for half a day. We found a pair of shoes lying in front of a cave on a cliff. They belonged to our missing companion.
But what is this cave? Why are there so many bloodstains all over the place?
It feels strange.
There is a dark aura flowing in this place. It's filled with a cold, insidious air that can't be described with words.
I don't think I'm the only one that feels like this, since my other companions seem reluctant to approach the cave, too.
At first, the comrade that suggested capturing the killers instead of killing them persuaded us to quickly proceed with the search, but after a discussion, the rest of us came to a consensus to give up the investigation of the cave. The comrade harshly criticized us, and after saying she would go in by herself, she forcibly continued the search alone.
We tried to persuade her against it, but we couldn't stop her from entering the cave. This is driving me crazy.
I get that she lost her reasoning after her lover went missing, but I really don't want to go inside that cave.
Damn it.
Why isn't she coming out? Did something happen inside?
Not knowing what to do, we waited for her for a bit before we turned our backs, as we were unable to endure the ominous feeling. It might have been my imagination, but right as we arrived at the foot of the mountain, I thought I heard a hideous laughter ring out from behind us.
It was the right decision to escape. The thing inside that place isn't something that can be handled by humans.
I shouldn't ever go near that place again. Sol Ji-hoo let go of the soundlessly struggling Un-yuri only after he finished reading the diary of an unknown survivor.
Are you all right?
Un-yuri stumbled instead of replying.
She grasped Sol Ji-hoo with both hands and steadied herself with great difficulty.
Huck. Huck. For a while, she took deep breaths in and out before wiping the saliva off her mouth with the back of her hand and straightening her posture. Sol Ji-hoo spoke while feeling awkward. I'm sorry. The smoke was faster than I expected. It's fine. Rather. Un-yuri collected her breath and shook her head. It was my first time experiencing such a thrilling ride. Though she said she was fine, she glared at him with a slightly resentful gaze. Sol Ji-hoo dryly coughed and switched the subject. Ah! Look over there. Un-yuri turned her head as he pointed towards the coast. It looks like we found it, doesn't it? Her face slightly brightened when she found the round cave carved into the cliff. Well done. Nice job, really. When Sol Ji-hoo fired off a succession of compliments and patted her slender back, Un-yuri's shoulders flinched. She made a bitter face, but Sol Ji-hoo was looking at the cave. Let's see. He started walking as he activated his 9 eyes. Then, he abruptly halted his steps. Yuri, who had been following behind him, also stopped with a confused look.
Wait a moment.
Yuri looked at Sol Jihu while frowning with her long, slender eyebrows. He had been hitting her in excitement just a few seconds ago. Now his expression changed without warning.
It was the face of someone finding out that the result he had gotten after solving a complex math problem was different from the answer.
Sol Jihu gulped while staring at the cave.
Yellow and orange?
This was unexpected.
There had been several cases in the past where 2 colors had simultaneously shown up, but this was the first time he saw 2 warning colors together.
It means, attention required, and, do not approach, ha. Sol Jihu bit his lips, unable to make heads or tails of the situation. If I try comparing it to the basic tutorial.
There was no rule against having the same thing come up in stage 2 or 3 just because it had already appeared in stage 1. For example, the Phantom, which was the most difficult enemy at the time he took the tutorial, had appeared ever since they escaped from the auditorium before making its entrance again in stage 3, causing the survivors to tremble in fear throughout the level.
From what he could gather from that case, it wasn't a bad idea to get rid of the thing inside the cave now. It could be better to settle things in advance in case of unforeseen implications in the future.
That was how Sol Jihu decided to interpret attention required.
And as for, do not approach. Let's back away for a moment. Sol Jihu quickly retreated while circulating his mana. He might have turned away to flee the area if immediate retreat recommended, or escape immediately popped up, but luckily enough, he didn't see any red or black.
Of course, orange also meant that there was danger, but like the diary of an unknown survivor mentioned, they would probably be fine as long as they didn't approach the cave more than necessary.
In that case, Sol Jihu created a mana spear after widening the distance to the cave.
When he aimed his palm at the cave to first test the waters, a blue mana spear shot out and split through the air. What happened next, however, caused Sol Jihu to doubt his eyes.
As soon as the mana spear came into contact with the black smoke floating around the cave,
it vanished? The mana spear disappeared without a trace. He felt a sinking feeling.
One more time. Sol Jihu prepared his mana once again.
He activated his mana to his limits, causing his reinforced mana circuits to become hot, and molded the anti-evil attribute into his mana. And when he threw the mana spear with all his might after a run-up, a lightning spear beaming with a golden light exploded out with a mighty radiance.
Peetst.
It was definitely different this time. Because he had thrown it at maximum power, the spear did not immediately disappear and pierced through the black smoke. However, that was it.
Sol Jihu's eyes widened after only a few seconds.
When dark gas suddenly shrouded the mana spear.
Peetst.
PZZ. The spear began losing its speed before ultimately losing its golden brilliance and melting away in the air.
Sol Jihu gazed at the cave with sunken eyes.
He had imbued the spear with high mana and the power of lightning, which was said to be the highest rank of all anti-evil energy.
However, the spear couldn't even go near the cave. He had yet to go all out. He still had sword chi, the defining skill of level 5 warriors.
Wong. When he linked his mana circuit with the machete's blade, the machete began resounding with a mighty sword sound while shining with golden light.
As he did that, the haze became a level darker as if it was mocking him.
Oh!
Feeling that it was daring him to try,
Sol Jihu hesitated while holding the machete.
He had to try to find out,
but for some reason, he had a feeling that it wouldn't be devoured like before.
Should I try going in?
The thought suddenly flashed past his mind, but he shook his head.
It wasn't just his 9 eyes, but his intuition too was ringing alarm bells.
They told him that he shouldn't approach the cave nor even touch the gaseous substance.
Sol Jihu smacked his lips.
It's still the final boss of the special tutorial, huh? It was at that moment.
Hee 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 hee. A creepy laugh echoed out of the cave. It was a terrible laugh that raised goosebumps just from hearing it.
The anti-evil attribute, E.H.
Keihi. I thought you were only a prideful punk believing in his trivial abilities.
But I guess your confidence wasn't baseless. What?
Hee 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 hee. To think that the anti-evil attribute was still being inherited. I thought I had thoroughly purged it that day. I am a little surprised, but it's a power that has already been defeated once.
You dare think you can harm me?
Sol Jihu's eyes sharpened.
Who are you? Me? A sneering laugh followed. Who knows? Why don't you come in if you're so curious?
It only ridiculed him instead of revealing its identity. Sol Jihu's mind began to race as he stood guard against the cave.
From what the voice said before, the being inside seemed to be something related to his anti-evil magic. The power of anti-evil was once defeated?
Now that he thought about it, he felt like he had heard of it before.
When he desperately combed through his memories, the words Kim Hannah had told him while investigating the warehouse appeared in his mind.
In Paradise, magic is categorized into 7 systems, depending on their application, method, and discipline.
Necromancy, anti-evil, summoning, alchemy, elemental, white magic, and black magic.
Among these, white magic and black magic were lost along with the Empire's collapse.
The heritage of anti-evil magic apparently disappeared a long time ago after being defeated by the followers of black magic.
Sol Jihu asked, half in doubt.
Black magic?
Ho! A surprised voice sounded out. How? No. An inheritor of anti-evil magic would naturally know. Good, good. Now.
Why aren't you coming in? Don't you need to take your revenge? The haze swayed as if to provoke him, but Sol Jihu decided to collect more information first. Why is a black mage here?
Hee 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 hee. I'll tell you if you come in. However, his opponent did not comply. Needless to say,
Sol Jihu had absolutely no intention of entering the cave.
Only an idiot would listen to that monster when it was goading him with such obvious intentions. Hee hee.
To see a punk that supposedly wields the power of anti-evil frozen in place in fear.
What a sight. Yes. Tremble as much as you wish.
A little more.
Only just a little left. My children are diligently at work. It's almost time.
It's almost time for what?
Un Yuri, who had been quietly standing to the side, spoke up. We won't go in. She spoke towards the cave. There's no reason for us to enter. From the looks of it, you seem to be trapped inside anyways. We only need to kill the rest of the killers to leave this place.
It looked like she also felt the need to collect more information and was throwing out random sentences to bait the monster into talking.
Kakek. What a cute little girl.
Then who? Huh. The black mage suddenly stopped laughing and made a strange noise.
Ho!
Now that I look at you, you are rather excellent.
No, in the end, you're still only a human. It's quite unfortunate, but you'll still serve as good nourishment. Hee 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 hee.
It spoke to itself and laughed at its own words. While Sol Jihu didn't know what it was talking about, he knew it wasn't anything good when it talked about nutrients.
Sol Jihu decided to first match Un Yuri's words.
Oh, I guess you're right.
But poor you. Your children will soon end up being killed by my hands. Kek.
But the only response that came back was a mocking laugh.
This is the problem with all you anti-evil magic users.
You're all so stupid. How could people be that stupid? Use your head a little. It's because you guys were so reckless, blindly believing in your powerful energy that you were destroyed in the end by us.
Well, do whatever you want.
I should be thanking you instead.
Hee 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 hee.
Sol Jihu frowned. Just where did this black mage's confidence come from?
He knew he shouldn't enter the cave.
But seeing its carefree attitude, he felt uncertain whether he should get rid of the remaining killers.
Let's think.
One thing he knew for sure was that the remaining killers would become stronger whenever they were killed by the survivors. When one died, their physical abilities increased, and when two died, their senses were enhanced. If he killed two more killers leaving only one remaining, he wasn't sure just how strong the last killer would become. There was a method of obtaining more magic rope to tie up the remaining three killers before killing them all at the same time, but he didn't know how many ropes were available.
He also had to take into consideration the time he would expend in finding the ropes and the killers.
He wasn't sure what would happen in the meantime, nor did he think the Black Mage would just watch and do nothing.
In other words, he was in a dilemma.
Sol Jihu closed his eyes. Seeing was not everything.
Maybe. Was he treating this tutorial too easily?
That thought flashed in his mind. What should I do?
After thinking for a while, Sol Jihu arrived at a decision. He would push on according to their plan. In any case, he was almost certain that Black Mage called the Sixth Mother played a pivotal role in this tutorial. While he didn't know what she was up to, all was good if he got rid of the perpetrator.
He felt this was the best option he had at the moment.
Miss Un Yuri. Sol Jihu spoke after organizing his thoughts.
No matter how I think about it, I think it's best to kill that thing now.
I think so too. Un Yuri thought for a second before agreeing. The souls of the dead killers went into the cave. Then the remaining killers became stronger. I was curious about the process, but I think there's a connection to the Sixth Mother inside that cave. In other words, there was a possibility that the remaining killers wouldn't get stronger if they killed the Sixth Mother now.
The two shared the same thought. Kill? Do you mean to kill me?
Ka-ha-ha-ha. Crazy laughter rang out of the cave. Good, then. Laugh if you will. Sol Jihu spoke while staring at the cave. Let's rip one here. Un Yuri's eyes widened. But that was only for a moment. She immediately understood and took out a piece of white paper from her bag.
It was a paper talisman. There's nothing else to see. Rip it. At Sol Jihu's order, Un Yuri ripped the blank paper talisman with hesitation.
You have used a necessary talisman. Scanning for the most needed spell in the current situation. Please wait. Activating the Liberation Forbidden Magic, Territory of Heavenly Jurisdiction.
Heavenly light will shine on the designated area and return all evil into nothingness.
Rumble. A deafening roar shook the earth as if an earthquake erupted and the sky began to split in half.
Ha! The Black Mage ceased its laughter.
A moment later. White light spilled out from the crack in the sky.
Wah! What?
The Black Mage panicked. That's impossible. Where did this supreme white magic suddenly come from?
The dazzling ray of light shined down the entire region before.
Wait. The rays focused and rushed into the cave, like a flood. Wait. Y-A-A-A-A-C-K.
A terrible scream rang out.
Asterisk. Meanwhile. In the neutral zone, a group of 5 or 6 people had gathered in front of a screen to watch the tutorial.
The room should have had a lively atmosphere judging by all the food and alcohol scattered around the floor, but for some reason, everyone was quiet.
The majority were struck speechless as they watched the live stream. This is driving me crazy. Cho Hong wrapped her face in her hands and shouted. Of all the things he could have done. Chapter 288.
There's no helping it. Kim Hannah said in a bitter voice. Representative must have done it thinking about the basic tutorial. Killing the Geikgui at the beginning itself makes the rest of the stage trivial, after all.
But. Still. What would you have done differently, Miss Cho Hong? Hearing this, Cho Hong shut up. To put it bluntly, she could say this only because she knew the ins and outs of the special tutorial. If she was participating without this knowledge, what would she have done?
I understand too. Kazuki said calmly.
I probably would have done the same thing once I found the final boss,
having a good method and spare paper talismans. He would have tried to acquire the special reward first before rescuing other survivors. After all, Un-Yuri was sure to outshine all other survivors in the treasure hunt, and bringing more people to the neutral zone would allow them to accrue more survival points. It was a plan without many flaws.
But the problem was, tisk, tisk, he underestimated the gods too much. Audrey Basilar clicked her tongue, then licked her lips.
How could the great gods not have predicted that situation?
It's more that this tutorial is too complicated. No matter which direction you take, the probability of the difficulty increasing is over 50%. The only difference is, by what extent.
Kim Hana explained skillfully.
Well, it's several thousand times more difficult than the basic tutorial, that's for sure. Audrey Basilar shrugged, then asked.
Anyway, how many conditions were there to increase the difficulty this high? Kim Hana raised 3 fingers as an answer.
Ehu. He sure is talented.
Audrey Basilar shook her head. Out of so many conditions, he really just hit the conditions that were most difficult to meet. How many paper talismans does he have left?
Cho Hong asked while pacing back and forth. Kim Hana folded her ring finger, making a V sign. 2. Cho Hong frowned. Arg, 2 isn't enough, is it? If he were to use them, that is. Right, he would need 5.
Hearing Kim Hana's cold reply, Cho Hong clutched her head.
Kook. Oh, Rahi sniggered.
Well, Tilda.
Twirling her hair, she spoke mockingly. Looks like our representative got a bit too ahead of himself. And now. And the corner of her mouth curled up. He's screwed. Asterisk.
The power of the paper talisman was formidable, and the effect of the spell was instantaneous.
The orange color was disappearing by the second. Ah! Ah!
Then, by the time the gas and the light mixed together and disappeared, and the ear-splitting scream stopped, the yellow color that covered half of his vision vanished as well.
As expected of the paper talisman, Sol Jihu walked forward with a grin.
Let's go.
I'm curious what's inside. Un-Yuri chased after Sol Jihu with a nod. The cave was rather eerie.
As they went deeper inside, they could see faint lights illuminating the darkness, but the chill grew stronger.
Sol Jihu advanced while breathing out white vapor, stopping when he reached a spacious opening illuminated by torches. Seeing the scenery that was revealed, he groaned shortly. At the center of the 40-meter chamber was an altar made of stone. To the left of the altar was a cross-shaped pillory, where a naked beauty with ice-colored hair was hanging. However, this failed to enter his eyes as he caught sight of a more shocking scene. Mummies. Dozens of withered mummies were placed neatly on the altar. There were some corpses that had not been mummified yet, but those were littered around the altar like trash. It went without saying that the corpses and the mummies were the survivors. It hadn't been that long since the tutorial began, yet close to a third of the survivors had died. Most of them must have died at the empty lot. It made sense since 4 people died at the start, and there were 5 killers present. Sol Jihu took his eyes off of the corpses and turned to the pillory. The vines coiled around the woman's body seemed loose. The ones around her arms and legs were on the verge of falling off, and only the vines around her neck and stomach were tightly restraining her body. The vines around her arms and legs too must have been tightly bound initially but had become loose for an unknown reason. She said the survivors were nutrients? The 6th mother had said that she only needed a little more time. It was probably right to assume that a few more sacrifices would have loosened the vines completely and freed the woman. If the black mage was released, what would have happened? That was close. Just as Sol Jihu was feeling relieved that he found out in time. Coo! The woman on the pillory groaned and twisted her neck. Sol Jihu raised his machete reflexively. She's not dead? Her black pupils lacked any whiteness in them, and the blood streaming down her eye sockets made her look monstrous. Although the woman possessed an innate beauty, the wicked energy erupting from her eyes was suppressing it completely. Damn. Damn me. How?
How can this happen?
My wish was so close to coming true.
An ominous voice that did not match the woman's mystical appearance resounded in the chamber. It's all because of this bitch.
If not for her. If my soul did not get trapped in this bitch's body. A disturbingly shrill cry echoed out in the cave. I refuse to perish like this. I waited so long.
The woman seemed to struggle frantically, and one of the non-mummified corpses dried up in an instant. Sol Jihu furrowed his brows.
I was wondering how she was still alive.
It seemed she barely held on by absorbing the survivors littered in the chamber. As he couldn't just let her recover, Sol Jihu immediately created a mana spear.
Ah!
Seeing the golden spear crackling with electricity, the woman's expression contorted.
This is unfair. I curse you. I will curse you. Sol Jihu threw the mana spear without hesitation. My children. Avenge. Pak. Before the woman could finish, her head exploded.
At the same time, her body radiated a pale light before freezing up completely. PSSSSSs. After crumbling into tiny pellets, they scattered into the air like dust of ice.
BZZ, BZZ.
As the vines around the woman's corpse fell, Un Yuri's cell phone buzzed.
Sender, unknown. #cave. Diary of an Unknown Survivor, page 68.
Sol Jihu was slightly startled after checking the page number.
They had skipped ahead by 38 pages since the discovery of the cave.
Why is there such a big difference?
Finally.
The sixth mother finally perished.
I stared at the corpses around the altar with bitterness. The comrades who had gone missing and the comrades who had entered the cave alone were all here. I shut my eyes.
The dying sixth mother's hateful curse still echoed in my ears.
I have to get out of here, fast. Before leaving the cave, I glanced back.
The pillory binding the sixth mother was still there.
What did she mean by unfair? Just what was the sixth mother's goal?
Goal? Sol Jihu looked up.
There was something on the altar that he hadn't seen before.
Ice?
Looking closely, he saw an ice flower radiating a chilling cold. Seeing a transparent gem bashfully hidden inside its pistil, Sol Jihu activated the 9 eyes. Ice essence. An essence of Soma, the evil incinerating energy. A Grandmaster Black Mage had once fused 2 energies of extreme ends, experimenting in the hopes that the reversing effect of the conflicting energies would pave the way to a new path. The experiment ended in complete failure. The Black Mage lost her physical body, and her soul became trapped in the body of an anti-evil energy user. Even after sealing her evil spirit for so long, the ice essence has not lost its purity. While it does not possess the destructive power of the lightning essence or the superb flexibility of the holy water, the ice essence possesses terrifying permafrost that can freeze even the world. Sol Jihu's jaw dropped after reading the explanation. Amazing. He never thought he would run into an essence of Soma. Xiao Yuhui had said that she went through great difficulties to acquire the one she gave Sol Jihu, and that it was a priceless item. This was worthy of being called a fortuitous encounter. Although the essence was still trapped within the ice, Xiao Yuhui should know how to extract it. Since its property changes when it makes contact with an outside stimulus, I need to be very careful in handling it. Miss Un Yuri. Sol Jihu grinned after grabbing the ice flower. You got very lucky. Un Yuri tilted her head but congratulated Sol Jihu anyway. Congratulations. You're talking like it's someone else's business. You don't want it? Ha. Isn't. All items acquired during the tutorial and neutral zone shall belong to the inviter. I know that's what we decided on, but I already have an essence of Soma. Un Yuri nodded her head calmly. Judging by the way her eyes were shining, she seemed interested. Well, it all depends on how you perform, Sol Jihu added with a wink. While he was at it, he decided to remind her one more time. Oh right. Be sure to leave a paper talisman.
We used one just now because we didn't have any other choice, but we need one for the neutral zone.
Yuri blinked rapidly before muttering, "Ah, is it for the impossible difficulty mission?"
Oh.
I'm surprised you guessed it right away.
That was the only thing I could think of.
Saying so, Yuri licked her lips while looking around. Right, with this paper talisman. She trailed off while grinning.
This was only the second time Sol Jihu was seeing her smile, the first being the time they met at the start of the tutorial.
Okay. I was curious anyway. This is great. Yuri vowed gladly. I'll make sure to not use the remaining 2 talismans. No, you can use one since we have 2 left.
Well, I have a plan to use one as well.
For what? You see. Once Yuri explained briefly, Sol Jihu's mouth widened. He had never thought of such a method before.
Do you think it's possible?
Sol Jihu stammered while staring at Yuri with a deep gaze. The only thing he was expecting out of Yuri was the magician class, but
where did she come from?
His thoughts changed slightly, no, greatly. Interpreting his silence the wrong way, Yuri hurriedly continued. Of course, it might be doable without the paper talisman, but you never know. It's better to be sure. Right, it's better to be sure. Do what you want.
I'm all for it. Sol Jihu played along.
Although he wanted to talk to her more, there were other matters to take care of. Talking could come afterward. Anyway, shall we go look around a bit more? The duo searched around the vines and the pillory. However, there wasn't much of anything in the chamber in the first place.
The only other things they salvaged were 4 healing potions found inside the leather bags of the dead survivors.
At that moment, Yuri found something. This person, he's still breathing. Under the altar, there was a survivor who had not been mummified yet. He was short and slim. Although he was bleeding from his head, his pulse was beating faintly. He's quite lucky. Sol Jihu splashed a healing potion on him as an emergency measure before putting him on his back.
Now that they had acquired the special reward, saving more survivors would benefit them the most.
I should be able to freely eliminate the killers too.
Since the 6th mother perished, the killers should not get stronger.
Sol Jihu gestured to the exit in a carefree manner. Should we go back to the cabin for now?
To save the man we hid under the bed?
Yes, though we can't be sure whether he's still alive. The duo left the cave in a hurry. After returning to the cabin, the duo first checked up on the man. Sol Jihu splashed 1 healing potion on his wounds and forced him to drink another.
Then, they turned to the man they saved at the cave.
Only after making him drink the last potion did Sol Jihu and Yuri take a break. The 2 men regained consciousness at daybreak. Sol Jihu could hear one of the men waking up, followed by soft whispers to wake the other sleeping man. Sol Jihu and Yuri munched on uncooked ramen as they waited for the men to come out. Soon, the door creaked open. Although they were staggering a little, walking out of the room with their own legs showed that they were feeling a lot better. The 2 men paused seeing Sol Jihu and Yuri sitting in the living room. Are you feeling better? Sol Jihu asked out of courtesy, and a man nodded in a daze. That's good. We found a high-quality healing potion by luck. Sol Jihu smiled and pointed at the supply of food and potions he had prepared beforehand. Go ahead. We can talk after you eat. The 2 men looked at each other slowly. The burly man spoke. Can we really eat this? Sol Jihu chuckled. Things might have been different if they were at the lot, but Sol Jihu felt a lot more generous now that he had the essence of Soma. We have more than enough to go around, so feel free. Even if we run out of food, we can go find more. Once Sol Jihu made the offer 2-3 times, the 2 men pounced on the food in a hurry. They quickly munched down uncooked ramen without even putting the seasoning on and emptied a bottle of water. How could they not be hungry when they practically came back from the dead? Thank you, Hung Nim.
They must have come to their senses after eating like they were possessed as the slim young man bowed politely.
My name is Park Worry. I won't forget the kindness you showed me today. Ah. Okay.
Sol Ji-hoo scratched his cheek with an awkward look. He wanted to say, splurge with your survival points if you really want to thank us.
However, he held himself back. I'm 24 years old. You can call me Forward Park. 1. Forward Park?
Yes, it's my nickname. The Hung Nims at my workplace call me that.
Sol Ji-hoo had a feeling the man worked at a nightclub as a bouncer and that the Hung Nims he was referring to were the well-known customers. Anyway, I'm surprised you haven't asked what happened. I would be curious if I were you. Isn't that obvious? Hung Nim and Mrs. must have saved us, right? Eun Yuri's expression became wry. On the other hand, Sol Ji-hoo replied with a pleased look. Looks like you have a good grasp on the situation.
Well, to tell you the truth, I hadn't lost my consciousness completely yesterday.
Although I was only half awake, I could faintly hear the things around me. Park Worry chuckled jovially and said subserviently. I'm. Next, the burly man carefully introduced himself. Yu Yolmu. I'm 34, and I'm an actor. He then added, I'm just a nameless nobody though.
Sol Ji-hoo nodded.
He knew why the two introduced themselves even though he didn't say a thing.
The way they were walking on eggshells the entire time they were eating, Sol Ji-hoo began to pity them.
Alright, Mr. Park Worry, Mr. Yu Yolmu.
Sol Ji-hoo nodded his head.
Well done surviving until now. Rest up, and you can tag along with us afterward.
See, can we really? Park Worry rejoiced very noticeably. Yu Yolmu seemed surprised by the offer as well. Is that okay? You don't have to if you don't want to.
Sol Ji-hoo spoke jokingly,
and Yu Yolmu shook his head.
No, I'm grateful. It's just that.
Judging by the way he was hesitating, it looked like he had at least some conscience.
I still gotta bring them along.
Not only would Eun Yuri get points for helping them, but these people would also be using survival points in the neutral zone.
Each of them was a precious customer from Valhalla's perspective. But, I have a condition. Yu Yolmu and Park Worry shouted simultaneously as soon as the words left Sol Ji-hoo's mouth. Why yes. Go ahead. I'd be fine with anything. They practically had accepted the condition already. Eun Yuri observed Sol Ji-hoo as she carefully bit on ramen. He hadn't even asked them to recognize him as the leader, but the two of them were listening to Sol Ji-hoo before anyone noticed. Sol Ji-hoo's condition was nothing difficult. It was simply to not go to the neutral zone right away. Only after filling the men's stomachs and checking their health did Sol Ji-hoo leave the cabin. He planned to rescue survivors and eliminate the killers while he was at it to scrape up points.
The group of 4 then ran into the first group of survivors in a dense forest when they found a small area hidden by a huge tree.
There were 4 survivors, all ensnared in traps.
They were either entrapped in fishing nets and hanging on the tree, or lying unconscious with a bear trap fixing them in place. Some had already died after falling into a pit full of stakes. Most people were unconscious from severe blood loss, but there was one person who hadn't lost consciousness yet.
Sol Ji-hoo let this woman down from the tree and asked what happened. She replied while sobbing. I don't know, hic. I fell into a trap and then was moved here.
A trap killer? From the looks of it, this woman seemed to have fallen into a trap elsewhere, then was moved here for storage.
Right, doing this would be a lot more efficient.
The survivors who weren't captured at the empty lot must have scattered all over the island. Going back to the base every time a survivor was caught would be inefficient. The trap killer must have set multiple traps and planned to take the survivors back to the cave after a certain number were captured. So if I wait here, the killer should come back, right?
And no. I'm not sure.
The woman seemed to be in a state of panic, but she still answered Sol Ji-hoo's questions clearly. It was lurking around here except for the times it went to retrieve people who fell into the traps. but I suddenly couldn't see it anymore.
I think it's been about 2 hours.
The killer had disappeared.
For a long time, to boot.
Sol Ji-hoo debated waiting or continuing with his search before deciding on the latter.
He judged that this was the only thing he could do and that he could run into the remaining killers again in the next stage. If he was lucky, he could run into more survivors as well. He found another group of survivors more quickly than he anticipated. He was circling around the various cabins while healing the survivors who were injured by the traps when he discovered 8 people in the 4th cabin he visited.
One unfortunate thing was that the majority of them had already died. Their corpses were damaged severely as if they were cut apart by a chainsaw. It was to the point that a gasping survivor with a long slit on his back was the healthiest among the injured.
Although Sol Ji-hoo managed to rescue him, he couldn't see any killer around the cabin either.
Then, just as the sun rose to the middle of the sky, Sol Ji-hoo came across a bizarre scene on a forest pathway. It was a group of 6 survivors, all naked regardless of being male or female, and their arms and legs bound tightly.
Did they run into a pervert killer or something?
The silver lining was that their injuries weren't as bad as the other survivors. Once Sol Ji-hoo cut the ropes binding them and loosened the cloths covering their mouths, the survivors all shouted with one voice.
What they said wasn't all that different from the trapped survivors' experience.
The pervert killer had apparently undressed its victims forcefully, tied a collar around them, and made them crawl on all fours, but then suddenly abandoned them and disappeared. The same thing had happened with this killer as with the trap killer. With this added knowledge, Sol Ji-hoo could no longer disregard the matter.
I ran around for half a day already. He had been feeling somewhat strange for a while. Although the island spanned a huge area, it didn't make sense that the 3 strengthened killers would not have found them. Let me think this through.
The 6th mother was most definitely dead. The diary of an unknown survivor said the same thing, so it was hard to believe that she escaped. Just as Sol Ji-hoo fell into deep thought. BZZ, BZZ, BZZ.
Eun Yuri's cell phone rang, not once but several times. Checking the phone screen, Sol Ji-hoo furrowed his brows.
The diary of an unknown survivor was updating consecutively.
Sender, unknown. Hashtag mysterious underground prison. Diary of an unknown survivor, page 32. While searching for our missing comrades, we discovered a staircase leading underground. As we carefully explored the mysterious dungeon, someone screamed. Dear God!
A horrifying monster was trapped inside a prison cell. Scared out of our wits, we ran as if our lives depended on it.
We managed to climb back out to the surface. But shoot! We left the killer we captured underground. The person who mistakenly left him there said he'd take responsibility and went back down.
However, he came back empty-handed.
Then,
he delivered some hard-to-believe news. The mysterious monster locked up in the prison cell had reached out through the bars, grabbed the neutralized killer, and started eating it.
A monster that eats killers. It was hard to believe, but none of us had the courage to go back down and check. Since the killer died, the remaining killers should get stronger. We began to walk away, worrying about the future days to come.
Huh? What happened? The other killers don't seem any stronger.
Sender, unknown. Hashtag mysterious underground prison. Diary of an unknown survivor, page 33. Let's think this through.
Killers get stronger when a survivor kills them with their own hands. But nothing happens when the monster in the prison cell eats them.
To test this hypothesis, we went through all sorts of hardships and troubles to capture another killer. After tying it up, we went back to the underground prison. Success! The killer was eaten, but the remaining killers didn't get stronger. Did the 6th mother not notice?
We couldn't be sure, but what we did know was that the killers did not get stronger. Great! We can use this method from now to get rid of the killers. We're no longer afraid of them.
Sender, unknown. Hashtag mysterious underground prison. Diary of an unknown survivor, page 34. Strange.
The imprisoned monster seems to have changed.
Even in the past, it gave off an ominous aura that made me reluctant to look at it. But now that aura is several times stronger. Is this because of the killers it ate?
This can't go on.
I have a feeling we shouldn't feed it anymore. I might be mistaken, but I think that thing just looked at me and swallowed its saliva. I'd rather face the killers or the sixth mother. I don't want to fight that thing. If it breaks out of the prison cell somehow. UGGGH. Just thinking about it gives me the creeps.
Sol Ji-hoo's expression quickly changed as he read the diary.
Wait. There was one question that rose above the others.
Why did the diary of an unknown survivor suddenly update? The diary was something that was updated depending on the situation. What did rescuing the survivors have to do with anything? Sol Ji-hoo looked back at the phone screen.
There was still a page he hadn't read. Sender, unknown. #diary of an unknown survivor, extra. Fuck. We should have killed that fucking monster first. Extra.
The entry only contained 2 sentences but delivered a powerful impact. That fucking monster? Sol Ji-hoo's eyes narrowed.
It was then. Following the sixth mother's will, the pervert killer has been devoured by the homunculus. Saw killer has been devoured. Trap killer has been devoured.
Messages suddenly popped up.
And next. Homunculus strength and movement speed increase. Homunculus 5 senses become sharper. Homunculus intelligence greatly increases. Homunculus regenerative power greatly increases. Be careful. Homunculus can now break out of the prison cell. Homunculus has consumed all killers.
By accepting absolute evil, Homunculus' overall power doubles.
More messages popped up. And thus,
Homunculus has not met all the conditions for revival.
The change. Homunculus' twisted internal balance causes it to rampage. Like always.
While absolute evil is rampaging, Homunculus receives a 700% increase in overall power.
Arrived suddenly.
Guo oh 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 oh. A terrifying howl burst out from far away, causing the land to tremor.
Even the blowing wind shook violently, causing an instinctive repulsion. It wasn't just Sol Ji-hoo and Eun Yuri.
The rescued survivors were all looking in the same direction.
Although they were far away, they could feel it.
An unprecedented, inestimable evil was sweeping across the land.
An evil aura that the killers and the sixth mother could not hold a candle to was encroaching upon them. 1.
The word used here in Korean is unique and means, someone who has no reverse gear, or, someone who is rash and careless and keeps going only in the forward direction.
Biz. A vibration filled the air as everyone stood in awe. A message from the guide has arrived. Sender, the guide. 1. Gather at the next island within the time limit. 2. Time left 0:40:00. Sol Ji-hoo clenched the phone in his fist. Although he had no idea what was going on, his instincts told him to head to the island. The guide should know something, he thought. Sol Ji-hoo departed as soon as he received the guide's message. After finding a car, he found a person among the rescued who knew how to drive and left the injured to his care. The rest headed to the bridge. The 4 bridges that linked the islands hung precariously over a steep cliff.
There was an odd clause highlighting that only one person was allowed to cross each bridge at a time.
Sol Ji-hoo quickly crossed the bridge, not paying much attention to this condition.
A group of about 10 people was gathered at the place.
They must have either escaped by luck or had just arrived after receiving the guide's message. Sol Ji-hoo waited patiently as a few other survivors arrived one after the other. The timer had gone down to less than 10 minutes when Phi Sora finally appeared. Only 28. Phi Sora counted heads and scoffed, but Sol Ji-hoo could sense a faint air of concern from the look on her face. What happened? As soon as he asked, Phi Sora gently bit her lower lip. First things first. She began but tapped on her phone in the next moment without finishing her sentence. Sender, the guide. 1. Rules for the scavenger hunt.
Avoiding the eyes of the homunculus, which will soon arrive at the second island. Search for the coins hidden across the island, and find a way to escape.
2. Conditions for escaping.
The entrance fee will be 100 coins.
Offer the sacrifice, which can be acquired from the gacha machine with 666 coins, to the altar at the center of the island to activate a portal linked to the neutral zone. 3. Precautions.
The homunculus will be in a rampaging state and can exert 16 times its original strength. Guided by the grudge of absolute evil looming over the island, the homunculus target will, first, be the survivor who annihilated the sixth mother.
Its regenerative abilities will also soar, enabling the homunculus to recover from mortal wounds. There is a limit to the resurrection, however.
The homunculus will no longer be able to heal itself after 5 mortal wounds have been inflicted to it. Rampaging homunculus will soon arrive on the second island.
Sol Jihu looked up from his phone and stared at Phi Sora. His eyes were demanding an explanation.
The job of a guide was to offer necessary guidance when needed, nothing more. However, seeing the confused look on Sol Jihu's face, Phi Sora could no longer keep her mouth shut. "Dear, aren't you forgetting one thing?"
Forgetting. Sol Jihu began to think.
Suddenly, he remembered the diary of an unknown survivor. How to eliminate the killers. That's right.
Wait, but I didn't forget about it. I just decided it wasn't important.
You've been watching, so you should know that the sixth mother.
I know.
Just hear me out first.
Phi Sora interrupted Sol Jihu. I don't know where to begin. She started with a sigh.
So you know that the sixth mother was a black mage. You also know that a failed experiment designed to combine conflicting energies destroyed her body and trapped her soul inside the body of an anti-evil energy user.
Yes, I know that. But
the black mage failed her experiment, but she didn't give up on it entirely. Just before she perished, she transferred the energy of black magic to her 5 devotees, promising to meet again in the future.
She planned on improving her experiment using what she learned from her failure. Phi Sora spoke quickly, perhaps because they did not have much time on their hands. In short, the ultimate goal of the sixth mother was her own resurrection. Her ambition went beyond freeing her soul.
She planned to create a body that could carry both types of energies, and then transfer her soul into that body. Sol Jihu felt dazed. Now he could understand the role of the homunculus that, up until now, seemed to have appeared out of the blue.
Then, the homunculus is
a new body that the black mage has prepared for her resurrection. Sol Jihu's face warped into a distinct frown. This meant that the cave from before was nothing but a decoy.
He had assumed that the black mage's wish was to set her soul free. However, as it turned out, the real objective had been elsewhere. Of course, the conditions for the resurrection are not easy to meet. First, you'd need an essence of Soma and the absolute evil, each representing one end of the conflicting energies.
Then, the soul of the black mage, who will serve as a mediator controlling both energies inside the new body, would have to be freed. Absolute evil? The killers. Though, they are really fanatics who served the black mage.
Phi Sora continued. Sacrificing survivors in order to liberate the sixth mother. That was nothing but an ostensible objective.
There are a total of 5 devotees of the sixth mother, but you might as well treat them as one. They became linked to each other when they received the black mage's energy. What this means is that they, too, are nothing more than sacrifices that would eventually be used to resurrect the sixth mother. So, the reason the remaining killers became stronger each time one of their own died was because the energy that had been divided into 5 pieces became closer to the whole. After hearing the explanation, Sol Jihu finally realized why the sixth mother had thanked him.
You're saying that killing the killers is part of the process of completing the offering. Yes.
When the 5 pieces come together, absolute evil is born.
Sol Jihu could only chuckle at the absurdity of the situation.
So, whatever I chose to do wouldn't have mattered.
No.
That isn't true.
Phi Sora shook her head.
Not everything was set in favor of the sixth mother. As she said, it's pointless for the survivors to kill the killers. But things could have been different had you fed the killers to the homunculus locked away in the dungeon.
The homunculus was a vessel created to embody both the essence of Soma and the absolute evil.
That is to say, if he had let the homunculus devour the killers, that would have been seen as an act of offering sacrifices, and the energy of the black mage would have remained inside the vessel without being delivered to the rest of the killers. If you had taken the time to find the homunculus and let it slowly devour 3 killers, things could have been different.
What do you mean? Did you not read the third message? The one about the homunculus gaining intelligence and a sense of self. Sol Jihu blinked his eyes.
The homunculus was born without a soul. But if it takes in the sacrifices not all at once but slowly, one at a time, it can absorb the energy of the sixth mother as its own and gain the ability to think independently. Then, even if the soul of the sixth mother was freed and the resurrection ritual was completed, the outcome wouldn't have been the same as the one you're facing.
The homunculus, now fully intelligent, will fight to protect its body according to its survival instincts.
It will fight over the ownership of the body and soul with the black mage who entered the vessel to take control of the energy within.
Even the black mage would not have expected this.
It's a miscalculation on her part. But the diary of an unknown survival hinted that we shouldn't feed the killers to the homunculus. That's also correct. If the homunculus gained more than 3 pieces of energy, it would have broken out of the dungeon. Then, it would have tried to devour everything in its path, be it the killers, the survivors, or the sixth mother. Having finished her explanation, Phi Sora looked down at her phone nervously.
Clearly there wasn't much time left.
It was then that Sol Jihu realized the mistake he had made.
So this is what attention required meant.
The special tutorial contained a huge secret that was simply beyond his imagination. Sol Jihu thought he was being reasonable, but it turned out he had been making decisions based on only small parts of the tutorial.
I have one more question.
Sol Jihu said. Why did the homunculus enter a rampaging state? Because it failed to meet the conditions.
Phi Sora answered quickly.
Its body was made to contain opposite energies. But in this case, only half of those energies came in, and all at once too.
So the homunculus couldn't properly digest the sudden surge of energy.
And because the sixth mother's soul isn't there to control the energy, it's natural for the homunculus to go wild. Then Phi Sora continued in a somewhat feeble voice. Though, in this case, it did so on purpose to get back at you. Sol Jihu closed his eyes.
A mess.
Everything was a huge mess.
He felt wronged, of course. The tutorial was simply too complicated.
Sol Jihu was no Sherlock Holmes.
It was virtually impossible for him to figure out the entire plot with such limited information. But he also knew this was an excuse. Looking back now, he could see that, though scarce, the hints were definitely there. What is the sixth mother's goal? There was at least one hint in the diary of an unknown survivor. He did think it was strange there were so many pages in the diary.
Had he taken the time to collect all the pages and proceeded with caution, he might have seen through the sixth mother's plans. Instead, he rushed and consequently failed. The noise inside his head was getting louder, but Sol Jihu defeated it with a shake of his head.
In any case, what was done was done. He knew his priority should be solving the problem at hand.
To think that, of all the options, you choose the worst.
Phi Sora sighed. Their conversation came to a halt.
As the silence prolonged, the survivors' faces began to fall. They could see that both the guide and the invited were upset. Wait. Giving in to the pressure, one of the survivors finally raised his hand and asked, So we have to find the coins or whatever to open the portal? Here, right now?
Yes. For the record, there are 6,000 hidden coins.
Though, that covers the entire island.
No, that's not what I meant. I meant that… well, from what I heard, it seems there's a scary monster on the way. He mumbled and looked at Sol Jihu. Phi Sora raised her eyebrows slightly.
You're blaming this man?
A look of disdain quickly crossed Phi Sora's face.
She knew he was one of the survivors Sol Jihu rescued.
She couldn't believe he was still looking for someone to blame, so much that she started to question his motives. Now that's too much. Park Worry raised his voice.
What the hell do you want? Excuse me? You'd be dead anyway if it wasn't for Hung Nim.
Let's do this together.
Is there anything I can do to help? That's what you should be saying.
Where's your conscience?
I haven't said anything yet.
Not me.
As the man shrugged nervously, a sharp voice interrupted their conversation. It was from the same woman who argued with the young man at the empty lot.
She looked at Sol Jihu and Park Worry with eyes full of discontent. I haven't received any help from the invited over there. I made it here on my own.
She didn't say much, but it was clear from the tone of her voice that she was pinning the blame on Sol Jihu and demanding him to take care of the mess that he had created.
All of you, shut up. It was then that Phi Sora raised her voice. I did warn you not to point fingers at others. The tone of her voice was quite serious. She was clearly angry. The woman flinched when her eyes met Phi Sora's threatening gaze. I didn't think that I would need to say this, but do you really think you survived all on your own? If this man hadn't distracted the killers, you would have died long before you reached the end of the bridge.
Are you aware of this? At this, the woman's face hardened. Her lips tightened but her expression remained vexed, and one could tell she wasn't persuaded.
Phi Sora took a deep breath and calmed herself.
Then, she looked at Sol Jihu, her eyes tight and worried.
Please don't die. I know the difficulty went up to impossible, but it isn't as bad as that time when the 7 armies appeared. Arg, say something. Didn't you beat up Undying Diligence like a demon back then? Just where did? Phi Sora disappeared before she could finish her sentence. It seemed that she had exceeded the time allotted for explanations and had been summoned back. And to prove that right, Kung. The earth shook. This could only mean one thing. Stage 2 of the tutorial had begun.
The confused murmurs did not last long.
Damn it. Run.
Soon, the group of survivors scattered about, starting with a couple of people running away from the crowd.
A few kept glancing at Sol Jihu as they ran. The reason was simple.
They knew the invited was the monster's first target and planned to get as far away from him as possible. Not long after, only 4 people remained. Sol Jihu remained silent. With his eyes closed tightly, he seemed lost in thought.
Kung. Kung. Meanwhile, the thumping sound grew louder.
Hung Nim.
Park Worry looked at the bridge, then at Sol Jihu, and pressed carefully. Sol Jihu finally opened his eyes. Would you two mind keeping an eye out?
Pardon?
Only for a while. It won't take long. Ah. Yes. Of course. The quick-witted Park Worry immediately understood. He grabbed Yu Yolemu's arm and moved out of the way. Un Yuri had been looking grim ever since this whole incident started.
If she hadn't suggested that they trace the killer's souls, the situation wouldn't be as bad as it was now. Feeling guilty, she said while fidgeting.
I'm sorry. To her surprise, Sol Jihu appeared calm.
It's all my fault that this happened. How is this your fault? Sol Jihu chuckled softly.
It was I who asked you to come and use the paper talisman.
There was no answer from Un Yuri. Glancing at Sol Jihu, she simply put her hands in her pockets.
Didn't you say you were saving that for some other time?
Her hands that were about to take the paper out stopped.
But, Miss Un Yuri.
Sol Ji-hoo whispered her name. You said you majored in modern dance, right?
Huh. Oh. Yes. A curious look crossed Un Yuri's face.
Why is he bringing up my major?
I was a gambler.
Gambler?
Yes, and I'm not proud of it. I've quit now though.
Sol Ji-hoo gave an awkward smile.
It's just that. I've been thinking about why the tutorial, which should have been easy, became like this.
When did it all go wrong?
And I think I figured it out. We never approached the tutorial for the purpose that it was designed for.
Everything worked in a certain way.
Of course, one didn't always have to play by the rules. In some instances, one could gain more by defying standard tactics.
But doing so always carried the risk of aggravating the situation.
And this wasn't the first time Sol Ji-hoo overcame obstacles through creative means.
He did so at the Forest of Denial, during the Arden Valley baiting operation, and then again during the Delphinion Laboratory rescue mission.
None of them were easy. The results were all good, but even the slightest mistake could have resulted in his death.
But fortunately, Sol Ji-hoo had never failed before. And as a result, he developed a certain habit. This habit forced him to look for an easy way out whenever he came face to face with a problem, rather than following the standard procedure.
Some might call him clever. Others would mark him as impatient.
This habit of his came in handy during emergencies, but it became a weakness when he was in a situation where he had to patiently follow standard measures.
It was simple, really. Sol Ji-hoo had approached the tutorial in the same way he had approached other problems.
It was just that this time, he didn't get the same good results as before. The way he saw it, the time bomb that had been ticking for a while now had finally gone off.
But there was a way to fix this.
Sol Ji-hoo spoke.
Go.
Excuse me?
I'll distract the homunculus. It seems that I'm the target anyway.
I'll keep it here for as long as possible, and meanwhile, I want you to find a solution.
Un Yuri seemed perplexed by Sol Ji-hoo's words.
Can I go with you? I don't think I'll be able to protect you and fight at the same time. Sol Ji-hoo shook his head. The situation has gotten worse, but let's not forget that this is still a tutorial.
He continued firmly. There's got to be a way out of this. I'm sure the seven gods have prepared a solution. And I believe you, Miss Un Yuri, will be able to find it. Still, Un Yuri continued to fidget with the paper, reluctant to let go.
Sol Ji-hoo smiled bitterly.
I don't think you should use the paper talisman. Of course, if everything turns out well, we could easily defeat the monster. But there's a chance that it won't turn out well.
There is no doubt that the paper talisman is a powerful item, but it's not a guaranteed solution to everything. He was right. The paper talisman could take care of the problem at hand, but it couldn't affect the root of the problem.
Un Yuri tightened her lips. She understood Sol Ji-hoo's concern.
They weren't sure if the paper talisman could kill the homunculus just once or all 5 times.
There might also be some secret to it that had yet to be revealed. And frankly, I think it'd be a waste to use it right now. It would be better to use it according to your plan, Miss Un Yuri. But, Un Yuri continued in a weak, hesitant voice.
If something ever happened to you,
Come on. I'm not that weak. Sol Ji-hoo patted his chest lightly with his machete. I don't think you know this, Miss Un Yuri, but I'm the one who killed the parasite's first army commander. I know that the homunculus is in a rampaging state and whatnot, but I don't think it'd be stronger than an army commander.
Really?
Really. Now, let's tackle this the standard way.
Sol Ji-hoo shrugged. You've seen my movement skill, right? If I find that I'm no match for the homunculus, I'll just run away.
Then I'll find you. We can use the paper talisman then. Un Yuri finally lifted her head up. Kung, kung. At the same time, the sound of the explosion became tangible. Sol Ji-hoo heard Park Worry's footsteps approaching him hurriedly. I think we're running out of time to talk. He pushed Eun Yuri and whispered. Just think of this as a game. If you find the solution before I kill the homunculus, you can have the ice essence I got from the cave. Eun Yuri, pushed and forced to walk by Sol Ji-hoo, finally put on a determined look. Okay.
And she announced, I'm definitely going to win. Sol Ji-hoo smiled. I'll look forward to it. Now then, the game begins now.
Go on, run. Eun Yuri began to run. She led Park Worry and Yu Yolmu to the island. Sol Ji-hoo watched her go, then turned his gaze to the other side of the bridge.
An impossible mission, was it? Kim Hana said before that a mid to large-sized team of level 4 or above Earthlings would be needed to have a chance of clearing it.
And Jang Maldong said that a true level 5 like Phi Sora could easily overpower 100 level 4 Earthlings. Of course, these analogies couldn't be 100% true, and he knew that.
Sol Ji-hoo was less proficient than Phi Sora in terms of technique, and he didn't have any of his usual equipment with him either. But these unfavorable conditions made him wonder how far he could really go.
Let's do this then. Sol Ji-hoo tightened his grip around the machete and raised his mana. And soon enough, Kung! Through the thick forest, a huge monster appeared.